Stealing the money is easy. Keeping it is what makes you bleed. Bleed Rate. A modern noir thriller. Chapter 1. The wig sat on Jack Almeida's head, the way a toupee sits on a man who has decided that everyone else is wrong about toupees. He studied it in the bathroom mirror of a Days Inn on East Van Buren, turning left, turning right, pulling at the part where the synthetic fibers met his actual hairline, and finding the junction unconvincing from every angle. The wig was black. It had been displayed on a foam head at the Spirit Halloween in the Fiesta Mall in Mesa, between a vampire cape and something involving a scythe, and the foam head had worn it well. The foam head did not have Jack's jaw, which was the jaw of a man who had spent 2 army tours doing things that left marks on a face, or Jack's neck, which was the neck that went with the jaw, or Jack's shoulders, which the Loomis uniform was trying to span with the structural optimism of a garment made for a woman of average build, and encountering something else entirely. He pulled at the shoulder seam. It gave a 1/4 inch and held. The uniform itself he'd sourced 3 weeks ago, not stolen, purchased, which was the part people always got wrong about how this kind of work operated. A Loomis Armored Services uniform, women's XXL, complete with the navy blue pants and the short-sleeve shirt with the gold shoulder patch and the laminated ID badge that said Clara Bowles, Courier, Employee 4471, above a photograph of a woman who bore approximately the same relationship to Jack Almeida that a Rand McNally map of Phoenix bears to the actual city of Phoenix. Same general territory, different in every specific. He'd sourced the ID from the Loomis intranet, which had the kind of security architecture that a company builds when it is confident it will not be attacked from the inside, which is the same confidence that produces the most entertaining results when it turns out to be wrong. Clara Bowles was real. She worked the Chandler Depot, day shift, 7 to 3, and her credentials were real. And what Jack had done with them was a temporary loan that Clara Bowles would never know about, and that would not affect her employment record or her Tuesday. He looked at the wig. He looked at what the wig was sitting on. The problem with the wig, and there were problems with other things too, but the wig was the main problem, was that black straight synthetic hair against Jack's brick-red complexion produced a color contrast that nature did not typically arrange. The face below the wig was a face that had been in the Arizona sun for 41 years, weathered to a shade that suggested adobe and old copper, and the hair above it was the blue-black of a raven's wing, and the combination communicated something but not femininity. He tilted the wig 2 degrees to the left. He tilted it back. "You look like a witness," he told himself. He meant it as a professional observation. He picked up the Loomis ID badge from the bathroom counter and clipped it to the shirt pocket and looked at Clara Bowles's photograph and looked at his own reflection and compared them in the systematic way he compared everything, noting what was the same, noting what was different, and working out what the difference was likely to cost him. Clara Bowles had brown eyes. Jack had green. Clara Bowles was 5'6". Jack was 6'1". Clara Bowles, according to the Loomis employee database which Jack had accessed through a contact who knew a contact who had once worked IT for a Pinkerton subsidiary, weighed 140 pounds. Jack did not weigh 140 pounds. He picked up the Motorola Logistics tablet from the counter, the real one, not a prop, sourced from the same intranet access that had given him the ID, and checked the day's run sheet one more time. The tablet showed the van's manifest, the route, the scheduled stops, and the cargo declaration, which read Secure Document Transfer, Meridian Logistics, and said nothing about $900,000 in banded 20s in 2 gray Pelican cases because documents and currency both fit in the category of things that travel better when described as something else. 12 minutes to departure. He put the tablet under his arm, picked up the Loomis-branded canvas tote he'd packed the night before. Change of clothes, a Glock 17, 2 spare magazines, a protein bar he'd been meaning to eat since Monday, and walked out of the Days Inn bathroom into the room and out the room door and down the exterior walkway to the parking lot without looking at anyone, because the first rule of looking like you belong somewhere is behaving like the question has already been answered. The Loomis Depot in Chandler operated out of a low beige building on Gurman Road that sat between a self-storage facility and a commercial tire place, the kind of industrial adjacency that makes a city look like it was assembled from a catalog of functions rather than designed. The building had no signage visible from the street, except a small logo above the roll-up door, which was deliberate. Loomis did not advertise its presence on blocks where it picked up and delivered things of value, for the same reason that a man carrying cash does not walk around announcing it. Jack did not go to the depot. He went to the fuel station on the south end of the lot where the vans staged before the morning runs, and he went there at 6:52, which was 13 minutes before the I-10 South van's scheduled departure, which was the window during which the actual Clara Bowles was not yet on site, and the morning supervisor, a heavy-set man named Dennis, who Jack had watched through a pair of Leupold binoculars from the self-storage facility roof across the street on 3 separate Tuesdays, was in the break room eating a breakfast burrito that came from a foil wrapper and required his full attention. Van number 7 sat at the fuel pump with its engine running. The driver, Aurelio Reyes, 47, 16 years with Loomis, the kind of employee whose file said things like reliable and consistent and detail-oriented in the annual reviews, which were all true, but whose file did not say anything about the Red Bull, because the Red Bull was not the kind of detail that ended up in annual reviews, sat in the driver's seat with his phone in his hand and his head down, reading something that absorbed him enough that he did not register the passenger door opening until it had opened and someone had settled into the seat beside him and closed it. He looked up. He looked at the ID badge. "Clara," Jack said. He kept the voice at the register he'd been practicing for a week, in the Days Inn bathroom, which sat somewhere between a woman with a head cold and a man pretending not to have one. Dennis said, "I'm riding second today." Somebody called out. Aurelio looked at him, the way a man looks at something that doesn't immediately resolve, not suspicious, not convinced, just processing. He was a man whose 16 years on the job had taught him to notice things that were off and to not say so until he was sure, which was a quality that served him well in most circumstances and would serve him poorly in this one. He looked at the ID. He looked at Jack. He looked at the tablet under Jack's arm, which was a real Loomis tablet running real Loomis software, displaying real Loomis route data, because the thing that makes a prop convincing is not how it looks but what it does. "Dennis text you," Aurelio said. "Called," Jack said. "I was already in the lot." Aurelio looked at his phone. He looked at the time. He had a run to make, and a schedule to keep, and a Red Bull in the cup holder, and the focused attention of a man who needs to be moving. "You certified on the Pelican protocol," he said. "Chandler orientation march," Jack said. Aurelio put the van in drive. I-10 South out of Chandler ran flat and straight toward Tucson through the kind of landscape that people from other parts of the country describe as nothing, and people from Arizona describe as everything, depending on what they've learned to look at. The saguaros stood back from the highway on both sides with their arms up, casting short shadows in the early morning sun. The Estrella Mountains sat low and blue to the southwest, a line of teeth along the horizon that the October light was still deciding what color to make them. Aurelio drove in the left lane at 73 miles an hour, which was 4 over the limit and the exact speed he drove every run. Not because he was reckless, but because he had calculated over 16 years that 4 over was the speed at which you move through traffic without being noticed in either direction. Jack noted this and filed it in the category of things that confirmed what his research had told him. Aurelio Reyes was a professional. He did his job the way a professional does it. Not brilliantly, not badly, but with the steady competence of a man who has removed as many variables as possible and eliminated surprise. The wig was sweating. Jack did not touch it. The van's cab smelled of Red Bull, and the specific synthetic pine odor of air fresheners that have been in a vehicle long enough to become part of its climate rather than a corrective to it. A photograph was taped to the instrument panel, lower right corner. A woman and two kids at what looked like a backyard birthday party. The kids in those pointy paper hats, the woman squinting into the sun with a cake knife in her hand. Aurelio's family, Jack made them. He looked at the photograph for a moment, and looked at the road. "You work the morning run, usually?" Aurelio said. "Afternoons, mostly." "You know Deb Martinez?" "Sure," Jack said, because agreeing with the general outline of a question is always safer than answering the specific one. Aurelio nodded. "Good people." He picked up the Red Bull, drank, set it back. "This runs clean today. Meridian transfer, 2 cases, hand-to-hand in Tucson. 90 minutes if the border traffic's off the highway." "Should be fine," Jack said. "Always fine, until it's not." Aurelio said this without inflection, the observation of a man who has driven enough miles to know that the runs that feel routine are the same runs that aren't, and who has made his peace with the fact that there is no way to tell the difference in advance. Jack looked at the tablet. He looked at the route display, which showed the I-10 South Corridor with their current position as a blue dot moving steadily toward the Chandler rest stop icon, which was a small gray square on the map that meant nothing to anyone except Jack, for whom it meant everything. 22 minutes. He set the tablet on the console between them and looked out at the highway and let the miles go under them and thought about the 2 Pelican cases in the back of the van, which he had not yet seen but had verified through the manifest. 2 units, gray, sealed, Meridian Logistics Transaction Reference ML4419C, declared value $14,000, actual value $900,000, the difference being a matter of what paperwork you were looking at and who had written it. The declared value was Walter Garnett's number. The actual value was the cartel's number. Jack's number was 900,000, because Jack read the actual paperwork, which he had obtained from a source inside Meridian Logistics, who had her own reasons for sharing it, and who Jack had paid $3,000 and would pay $3,000 more when the job was done, and who had no knowledge of what the job was because Jack had described it to her as a compliance audit. She believed him. People believed what they were given room to believe, which was a principle Jack had operated on for 20 years, and which had never failed him in the way that principles generally fail, which is slowly and then completely. The government gray Ford Fusion was 12 years old and smelled of the previous agent who had used it, which was a man named Doherty, who had left behind a McDonald's bag under the passenger seat and a pine tree air freshener on the rearview mirror that had given up emitting pine tree approximately 6 months ago and now just hung there as a reminder of a fresher time. Nick Tolliver drove it south on I-10 at 69 miles an hour with a podcast playing through the dash speaker, a basketball analytics show he'd been following for 2 years and which was discussing defensive rotations in a way that required more attention than he could give it right now, which meant he was half listening with the distracted focus of a man who is thinking about something else but doesn't want to turn the sound off because silence makes the other thing louder. The other thing was the manila envelope on the passenger seat. It was a standard 9x12 craft envelope, sealed with 3 layers of evidence tape, his signature across all 3, and contained a seized financial ledger that the Tucson Field Office's Forensic Accounting Unit had been waiting on for 6 weeks. The ledger documented 18 months of wire transfer activity through a Scottsdale-based LLC called Palomino Capital that the field office believed was a Sinaloa distribution account, and it had come out of a raid on a Tempe storage unit 3 days ago, and it needed to get from Phoenix to Tucson without being flagged on any system that the organization's lawyers monitored, which meant it traveled by hand rather than official transport, which meant tow liver. His supervisor had said, "Straight shot. I-10. Don't stop. What if I need gas?" "Don't need gas. Fill up before you leave." "What if I tow liver?" "Yeah. Don't stop." He had filled the tank. He had not stopped. He was doing 69 miles an hour in the right lane with the envelope on the passenger seat, and his hand resting on it with the unconscious proprietary weight of a man who has been told this thing matters and has decided to treat it like it matters, and the basketball podcast droning about pick-and-roll coverage, and the desert going past on both sides in the flat October light, and the Fusion's air conditioning running at the maximum setting, because October in the Phoenix corridor did not mean what October meant elsewhere. It was 92 degrees outside, and the Fusion's compressor was doing its best, and its best was marginal. He was gaining on a white Loomis armored van in the left lane. He did not know it was a Loomis armored van. He knew it as a white panel van, going slightly faster than he was, which put it in the category of things he was aware of without being interested in. He turned up the podcast. The Airport Express shuttle from the Flying J on I-10 to Phoenix Sky Harbor left at 7:15 in the morning, which on this particular Tuesday meant it left at 7:22 because the driver, a man named Hector who maintained a running commentary on I-10 traffic conditions that nobody on the shuttle had requested, needed to resolve a dispute with the Flying J's automatic payment terminal that had rejected his fleet card twice before accepting it on the third attempt. Dobie Prout used the extra 7 minutes to buy a 24-ounce Bud Light from the Flying J cooler, which the Flying J was technically not supposed to sell at 7 in the morning. But the kid at the register had the expression of a person performing his 4th consecutive overnight shift and operating at the level of engagement where the word technically had lost its purchase. Prout got on the shuttle. He was by trade and by inclination a man between things. Between jobs, specifically. He'd been doing demo work on a kitchen remodel in Scottsdale for 6 weeks, until the contractor had informed him last Thursday that the project was on hold pending a permitting dispute with the city, which was the kind of sentence that meant different things to different people, and meant to Dobie Prout that he should go to Phoenix and see his sister, who lived in a house in Laveen that had a guest room and a refrigerator that he had standing access to, and who had told him the last time he visited that the next time he showed up without calling first, she was changing the locks. He had called first. She had said fine, but Dobie, not more than 3 days. He had 1 bag, a duffel, packed for 5. The shuttle had 9 other passengers, most of them with the specific glazed quality of people traveling before 7:30 in the morning. A man in a dress shirt who kept checking his phone, 2 college-age women sharing earbuds from the same phone, an older woman with a rolling carry-on she'd wedged across the aisle as if defending territory, a heavy-set man in a sun's cap asleep before the shuttle cleared the parking lot. Prout took a window seat on the passenger side, 3rd row from the front, and settled in with the Bud Light inside the duffel bag where it couldn't produce a conversation, and looked out the window at the I-10 on-ramp the shuttle was approaching. And there was the Loomis van. It sat at the fuel pumps on the south end of a lot to the right of the on-ramp, idling, white with the Loomis logo in navy on the side, the shield and the name, and the engine running, which Prout noted because he noticed things about vehicles the way a man who has worked construction for 20 years notices things about structures. Not professionally, not usefully, just automatically. The van had an idle that ran clean. Someone maintained it. And in the passenger seat, he could see through the windshield from this angle, the morning sun hitting the glass at a degree that made it transparent rather than reflective, sat a woman. Prout looked at the woman. The shuttle moved toward the on-ramp. He looked through the window at the passenger seat of the Loomis van, and he looked at the woman in it with the same automatic cataloging with which he noticed the van's idle. And what he cataloged was this: the jaw was wrong. Not wrong for a woman in the general sense, wrong for the face it was attached to, wrong in the way that a piece of furniture is wrong for a room, like it belongs somewhere with more square footage. Square through the chin and wide through the cheekbones, and the neck below it was not a woman's neck. The hands on the logistics tablet in her lap, visible for just a moment before the shuttle angle changed, were the hands of a man who had done work that left hands looking that way. The wig was black and straight. The face below it was not the face the wig expected. Prout drank from the Bud Light inside the duffel bag through the top zipper, which he had practiced, and looked out the shuttle window as the on-ramp brought them up to highway level, and the Loomis van fell behind and disappeared into the traffic going south. He thought about saying something to the driver. He thought about what he would say. He thought about how it would sound, and what it would produce, and whether the relevant authorities would respond to a tip from a man drinking a Bud Light through a duffel bag at 7:20 in the morning with the urgency that the situation seemed to warrant. He decided they would not. Also, it occurred to him, he had a flight to catch. Also, and this was the thought that settled it, a woman who looked like that was probably having a morning that had already handed her enough without Dobie Prout adding to the pile. He zipped the duffel. He looked at the road ahead. The shuttle merged into traffic and ran south through the October desert, and Prout let the thought go and watched the saguaros stand along the highway with their arms up, which he had always found either funny or ominous, depending on what kind of day he was having, and which today he had not yet determined. Jack watched the shuttle move up the on-ramp in the passenger side mirror. He watched it merge into traffic and fall 2 lanes to the right and stabilize there behind a FedEx 18-wheeler. The shuttle was an airport express. The logo on the side was visible, yellow and blue, and it had come off the Flying J lot at the same time the Loomis van had pulled away from the fuel pump, and the angle of the on-ramp had put it above and to the right of the van for about 40 seconds, which was 40 seconds during which anyone on the shuttle's passenger side had a clear sight line through the Loomis windshield. He looked at the sight line. He worked the angle. A man standing at street level would have seen opaque glass. A vehicle coming off an elevated on-ramp at a 30-degree angle to the van's nose would have had the glass go transparent. He sat with this for a moment. Borrelio had the radio on low, an AM sports station talking about the Cardinals' defensive line with the resigned tone of a broadcast team that has made its peace with its subject. The Red Bull in the cup holder was half gone. The air conditioning blew cold against the left side of Jack's face, and the desert ran past the windows, and the logistics tablet showed the blue dot moving south on I-10 and the Chandler rest stop icon 19 minutes ahead. The shuttle had 9, maybe 10 people on it at this hour. Most of them, at 7:20 in the morning, had the internal orientation of people managing their own situations. They looked at phones. They looked at the backs of the seats in front of them. They looked at the floor in the way of people who have set themselves an objective and intend to reach it without incident. Most of them. Jack looked at the road. He thought about a third-row window seat on the passenger side of a shuttle going up an on-ramp at 7:20 in the morning, and what a person in that seat might have registered in 40 seconds of elevated sightline, and whether what they'd registered would resolve into something they'd do anything about. He thought about the wig. He decided it was fine. He had made this decision before, about other things, and had been right often enough to keep making it. The wig was fine. The shuttle was moving away from them at highway speed. The rest stop was 19 minutes out, and the job had a sequence, and the sequence had been tested, and the 40 seconds on the on-ramp were a variable he had not planned for, and could not now change. And the thing about variables you cannot change is that spending time on them is the same as burning time you need for the things you can. He picked up the logistics tablet. He looked at the manifest. ML4419C, 2 units. $900,000, riding in gray Pelican cases, in the back of a white van on a highway in the Arizona desert on a Tuesday morning in late October, going south toward a rest stop where a man named Tag Dunning was supposed to be parked in a '98 Silverado waiting for a signal. Jack thought about Tag Dunning. He thought about the specific quality of Tag's reliability, which was the quality of a man who understood instructions and intended to follow them, and experienced, between the understanding and the following, a gap that occasionally widened into something that required explanation after the fact. He thought about the rest stop. He thought about the Silverado. He thought about 18 minutes, which was how long he had before all of this became whatever it was going to become. And he picked up the Red Bull from the cup holder. Aurelio looked at him, and Jack looked back, and Jack set it down without drinking it. And Aurelio returned his eyes to the road without comment. 17 minutes. The blue dot moved south. The saguaros stood along the highway with their arms up, and the October sun hit the Estrella Mountains at the angle that turned them the color of old iron, and the Loomis van moved through all of it at 73 miles an hour, 4 over the limit, the exact speed at which things move when they are about to stop being routine. Chapter 2. Aurelio Reyes had been getting Red Bulls from the vending machine at the Chandler rest stop every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 11 months. He pulled in at the same spot, third space from the north end of the parking lane, close enough to the building that he could see the van from the machine, bought a 12-ounce can because the machine did not stock the 16-ounce, and was back in the driver's seat in under 90 seconds. 90 seconds was the established number. Jack had clocked it on 3 separate Tuesdays from a gray Honda Civic he'd rented specifically for the purpose, parked in the rest stop lot with a Subway sandwich and a clear line of sight to the vending alcove. The first Tuesday, Aurelio had taken 87 seconds. The second, 93. The third, 89. The average was 90, which gave Jack a working window of, call it 2 minutes with buffer, accounting for the time Aurelio spent locked back in the cab and visible through the side glass before he put the van in drive. 2 minutes to move 2 Pelican cases from a Loomis van to an F-150 bed. Jack had run the sequence in a parking lot in Tempe behind a commercial laundry, using 2 equipment cases from a camera rental house and a different F-150, same year and color, for 3 evenings, until he could do it in 1:45 with both hands occupied and the adrenaline absent. The adrenaline would make him faster. The wig would not. He had decided the wig came off at the rest stop. There was no security camera covering the south end of the lot from an angle that would catch his face. He'd confirmed this on the third Tuesday with a slow walk through the lot with his phone in his hand like a man texting, eyes tracking the camera housings above the building entrance and the fuel canopy. The south end was a dead zone. He would pull the wig off when he stepped out of the van and put it in the right cargo pocket of his pants, where it would look like nothing more than a man who had overpacked, which was a description that covered a large percentage of the population. He had planned for all of this. What he had planned for less thoroughly was Tag Dunning, which was an acknowledgement he would not have made out loud, but which the facts, as they were about to arrange themselves, would make on his behalf. The white rag. It was a piece of cotton, cut from a bedsheet approximately 12 inches square, kept in the right side pocket of the Loomis uniform pants, and the signal was simple. When the van takes the Chandler rest stop exit, Jack drops the rag from the passenger window. Tag sees the rag from the lot, where he has been parked in the '98 Silverado since 6:50, pulls around to the south access road, and positions the F-150 at the loading zone behind the rest stop building. The F-150 belongs in a technical and temporary sense, to a man named Robert Gutierrez of Mesa, Arizona, who had sold it to Jack for $3,200 cash 3 weeks ago, under the name David Park, no paperwork, no plates transferred, and who had described the engine as rebuilt, which it was, though rebuilt by what sounded like a man with ambition and access to parts rather than training, which had required Jack to spend an additional $400 at a shop in Apache Junction to correct. The F-150 was parked at the south end of the Chandler rest stop lot, backed into a space along the perimeter fence. Tag Dunning was parked in the Silverado, at the north end of the same lot. This was an arrangement Jack had specified. North end, near the entrance, sightline to the exit ramp, far enough from the F-150 that no one connects the two vehicles if anything goes wrong before the signal. Jack had been very clear about north. Tag was at the north end. Jack dropped the rag. Tag Dunning saw the white cloth come out of the van's passenger window. He was watching for it. Had been watching the I-10 exit ramp for 22 minutes with the focus of a man who has been given one specific thing to do and has committed to it, which was more than most people gave Tag credit for. He registered the cloth, registered the van, said okay to himself in the tone of a man marking the beginning of a sequence, and started the Silverado. The Silverado started on the second try, which was its average. Tag pulled out of the lot and turned south on the service road that ran along the east side of the rest stop and would bring him around to the south access road where the F-150 waited. This was the route Jack had walked with him twice. This was the route Tag had driven once on his own to confirm he could find it without Jack in the car, which had produced in Tag a confidence that was, in retrospect, higher than the evidence warranted. The service road ran south for 200 yards and then ended at a T intersection. Left went to the south access road, the F-150, the loading zone, the plan. Right went to a Circle K. Tag looked left. He looked right. The Circle K was right there. It sat on the corner of the service road and a frontage street, a low beige building with a red and white sign, and the specific commercial brightness of a convenience store that stays open all night and has not turned its lights down since. Tag had not eaten breakfast. He had been in the Silverado since 6:50, watching an on-ramp for 22 minutes on an empty stomach, and the Circle K had a sign in the window that said hot dogs 2 for $2.50 and another that said breakfast burritos, and both of these signs were legible from where he sat. He sat at the T intersection for 4 seconds. He turned right. He pulled into the Circle K lot and went inside and stood at the register and looked at the hot dog carousel and the breakfast burrito warmer and made a decision in the wrong direction, which was to look at the register instead of the food. The register was a newer model, a touchscreen point-of-sale system that the Circle K franchise had been rolling out across its Arizona locations, and it had a cash drawer that Tag could see from where he stood. And the cash drawer was closed, but the line between closed and open on that model of register was a matter of the clerk pressing a button, and the clerk, a woman of about 60 in a Circle K vest and reading glasses on a beaded chain, who had the expression of a person who has worked retail long enough to have seen everything and found most of it disappointing, was standing directly behind the register. Tag pulled up his bandana. The woman looked at him over her reading glasses. "Open the register," Tag said. The woman looked at the bandana. She looked at Tag's face above it, which communicated nothing she found threatening, and at his hands, which held nothing. "You got a weapon?" she said. "Open the register." "I'm not opening the register for a man without a weapon. That's just a man with a bandana on his face asking me to give him money." She picked up the phone on the counter beside the register. "I'm going to call the police now." "Wait," Tag said. She waited. Tag thought about the situation he was in, which had a specific shape that he was only now appreciating fully. He had a bandana on his face, and no weapon, and was standing in a Circle K, attempting to rob a woman who had the posture and the tone of a retired schoolteacher, and the phone already in her hand, and a locked register, and a breakfast burrito warmer to his left that smelled like green chili, and a hot dog carousel to his right that smelled like hot dogs that had been there a while. "Ma'am," Tag said. "I'm calling." "I didn't really think this part through," Tag said. The woman looked at him for a moment, with the expression of a person who has been handed a sentence that is more honest than she expected. She put the phone down. She did not open the register. "You want a burrito?" she said. "No. Thank you." Tag pulled the bandana down. "I'm going to go." "You should," she said. He went. Her name was Dolores Vega. She had taught 7th grade English in the Chandler Unified School District for 26 years. She had, in that time, encountered a large and varied catalog of situations that had required a fast read of what was actually happening versus what was being presented. And Tag Dunning, in the 90 seconds he had spent in her store, had registered as the latter. A man presenting a problem that he had not actually thought through, which was a specific and identifiable category of problem, and one for which the correct response was to decline to participate. She called the police after he left. The dispatcher asked if she wanted a unit to respond. "Not urgently," Dolores said. He seemed more confused than dangerous. She hung up and sold 2 coffees and a bag of chips to a man who needed gas, and went back to the paperback she kept on the shelf below the register, which was a Donna Leon novel she'd been working through for 2 weeks, and which was better than her morning had been. Jack did not wait for Tag. The plan had a contingency for Tag, which was that Jack did not need Tag. Tag existed in the plan as a convenience, a second set of hands for the Pelican cases, a driver if Jack needed to leave the F-150 in a hurry. What Tag did not exist in the plan, as was essential, because Jack had learned from experience that anything essential that he assigned to someone else would, at the critical moment, become a problem he had to solve himself, and had planned accordingly. He was out of the van before Aurelio reached the vending alcove. He pulled the wig off as he stepped down from the passenger seat, one clean motion, the synthetic hair coming off his head and going into the right cargo pocket in the same movement. The October air hit his actual scalp, his own brick-red hair compressed under the wig for 40 minutes, damp at the roots, and he ran his left hand over it once and kept moving. The van's rear doors had a keypad lock. Jack had the code from the same intranet source that had given him Clara Bowles's credentials, 4 digits, changed weekly this week. S-code obtained at 11 p.m. Sunday from a shared document that 3 Loomis supervisors had access to, and that lived on a server protected by a password that one of those supervisors had written on a post-it note stuck to the bottom of her keyboard, which Jack had photographed during a walkthrough of the Chandler Depot 2 weeks ago on a false pretext involving a catering delivery that Tag had almost correctly executed. He punched in the code. The lock disengaged. He swung both doors open and stepped up into the van's cargo section, which was clean and bare-walled and smelled of metal and upholstered carpet. And there were the 2 Pelican cases. Gray, 1510 size, the same dimensions as a carry-on bag, each one secured to the cargo rail with a ratchet strap that had been looped through the handle, in the way a man loops a strap who is doing it for the 20th time and has stopped thinking about whether it is the best way to do it. Jack unclipped both straps in 8 seconds. He lifted the first case by the handle. 23 pounds, roughly, consistent with what 9 stacks of banded 20s in an interior padded hard case weighed, which he had tested with an equivalent load in his kitchen the previous week. He carried both cases to the F-150 in 2 trips. The first trip, right case in the truck bed, laid flat, pushed to the cab end. The bed liner was rubber, non-slip, which he had installed himself the week before because the original liner had been cracked and because a non-slip liner meant the cases did not move when he went off-road, which he planned for in the way he planned for everything that he hoped would not be necessary. The second trip, left case, same placement, stacked on the first. He pulled a green mesh cargo net from under the wheel well cover and stretched it over both cases and clipped the hooks to the bed rail anchors. 30 seconds. He closed the truck bed cover, a hard fold-up tonneau he'd also installed, matte black, sitting flush with the rail, and walked around to the driver's door. Behind him, across the lot, Aurelio Reyes came out of the vending alcove with his Red Bull and looked at the open rear doors of his van and at the rest stop lot and at the south perimeter fence and at the absence of the F-150 that had been parked there and at the Loomis uniform pants and the Loomis branded canvas tote lying on the pavement beside the open doors, which was where Jack had set them when he'd changed into his own clothes in the van's cargo section. Aurelio did not move for 2 seconds. He processed. Then he dropped the Red Bull and reached for the radio on his belt, and Jack, from the F-150, watched this in the rearview mirror and turned the key. The rebuilt V8 started on the first try. He pulled out of the south access road onto the service road and turned north toward the lot exit. Get down on the ground. Aurelio looked at the man standing between him and the van. He had come around the van's rear doors, and there he was, not a large man, not small, mid-40s maybe, in jeans and a dark gray t-shirt with a Glock in his right hand at his side, not pointed, just present. The hair was brick red and compressed from the wig, and the face below it was the face that had been on his passenger side for 40 minutes, and he had not known it, and he knew it now, and the knowing did not change anything about the Glock. Radio on the ground too, the man said. Aurelio set the Red Bull down on the pavement with the specific, deliberate care of a man buying himself a moment. He unclipped the radio from his belt. He set it beside the Red Bull. 5 minutes, the man said. You stay down 5 minutes, and then you call it in. You don't follow, you don't make a move on the truck, you just call it in. Okay, Aurelio said. You have a family, the man said. Aurelio looked at him. The photograph on your dash. Wife and 2 kids. Birthday party. He said it without inflection, not as a threat, not as sentiment. As information. I know who you are. If you're reasonable today, your day stays bad but manageable. You follow me, it gets worse. He paused. Get down. Aurelio got down. He lay face down on the warm pavement of the Chandler rest stop parking lot, with his cheek against the concrete, and the October sun on the back of his neck, and the Red Bull can 3 inches from his face, and listened to the V8 pull away south on the service road, the sound dropping through the registers and then gone. He waited 4 minutes. He got up. He picked up the radio. He stood at the back of his empty van and looked at the open rear doors and the 2 empty cargo rail straps and called it in. His voice, on the recording that the Loomis Dispatch Center kept for 90 days, and that would be requested by 2 separate law enforcement agencies within the hour, was level and clear and contained no information that Aurelio Reyes had not decided to include. Nick Tolliver took the Chandler rest stop exit because he needed to use the restroom. This was not a tactical decision. It was a biological one, produced by 2 cups of coffee at 6:15 that morning and 60 miles of I-10 and a basketball podcast that had not been sufficiently distracting to make him forget the coffee. He pulled the Fusion into the lot at the north end and parked and was halfway out of the car before he registered what was in the south end of the lot. A white Loomis armored van with both rear doors hanging open. A man sitting up from the pavement beside it, shaking concrete dust off the front of his uniform shirt with the specific, shaky deliberateness of a man who has been down against his will and has not yet fully processed that it is over. A radio in his hand. Tolliver stopped. The manila envelope on the passenger seat. The evidence strap on his wrist. His supervisor's voice, "Don't stop." He looked at the Loomis driver, sitting up in the parking lot. He looked at the open van doors. He looked at the service road on the south end of the lot, which ran to a T intersection, and beyond it to a frontage street. And on the frontage street, 300 yards out and moving fast, a dark green F-150 with no front plate was making a right turn onto the I-10 on-ramp. Tolliver got back in the Fusion. He did not call it in. He would think about why he did not call it in for the rest of the day, and arrive at no satisfying answer, except that the truck was right there and moving. And if he stopped to call it in, the truck would be on the highway before dispatch could do anything about it, which was true, and which was also the kind of reasoning that sounds watertight right up until someone with rank asks you to walk them through it. He put the Fusion in drive. He came out of the lot onto the service road at a speed that the Fusion's front-wheel drive handled with reluctant compliance, the tires finding traction on the asphalt in stages. He hit the frontage street and turned right and came up the I-10 on-ramp at the Fusion's version of urgency, which was not a thing that frightened a V8. He got the F-150 in his sightline on the highway. Green, dark, no front plate, 300 yards ahead in the center lane, doing 80 and a 70 and pulling away. Tolliver pushed the Fusion to 85. He gained 40 yards. The F-150 moved to the left lane and went to 90, and Tolliver went to 90, and the Fusion's engine produced a sound that suggested it had an opinion about this that it had not been asked for. And they ran south on I-10 in the full morning light with the desert on both sides, and the mountains blue in the distance, and Tolliver's hand on the wheel, and the evidence strap cutting into his left wrist against the door panel. He was gaining. The F-150 took the exit for the Loop 202 interchange at 90 miles an hour without signaling, which gave Tolliver approximately 3 seconds of warning. And the Fusion made the exit but lost it in the cloverleaf, the radius too tight at that speed, the front end pushing wide, Tolliver correcting left, and the car responding slower than his hands expected. And when he came out of the cloverleaf, the center lane ahead was clear. He slowed. He pulled to the right shoulder. He sat on the shoulder of the Loop 202 on-ramp with the Fusion's hazard lights on, and both hands on the wheel, and the basketball podcast still going on the dash speaker, mid-sentence about second unit scoring, and looked at the empty highway ahead. The F-150 was gone. He looked at the envelope on the passenger seat. He looked at the evidence strap on his wrist. He thought about the open rear doors of the Loomis van, and the driver sitting up from the pavement, and the red hair visible through the F-150's rear window for the 2 seconds he'd been close enough to see it, brick red bright in the October sun, the kind of hair that shows up in a rearview mirror like something on fire. He picked up his phone. He called his supervisor. The supervisor's name was Carver, and Carver answered on the second ring, and Tolliver told him what had happened, beginning with the rest stop and not going back further. And Carver listened without speaking for 45 seconds, which was a long silence for a man whose silences usually lasted 3. "Are you on the 202? Carver said. "Yes." "Do you still have the envelope?" Tolliver looked at the envelope. "Yes." "Get to Tucson." "The Loomis driver." "Loomis has it, Tolliver. They called it in 12 minutes ago. Half the Chandler PD is at that rest stop right now." A pause. "Get to Tucson. Drive the speed limit. Call me when you're at the field office." The truck went east on the 202. Red hair, dark green F-150, no front plate. "If we put out." "Tolliver." "Yeah." "Get to Tucson." Tolliver sat on the shoulder for another moment. He looked east along the Loop 202, which ran straight and empty into the East Valley Desert, the lanes shimmering in the heat that was already building at 8 in the morning, the horizon flat and brown and offering nothing. He thought about the red hair in the rearview mirror. He thought about the way the F-150 had taken the cloverleaf. Not panicked, not reckless, but precise, the kind of driving that comes from knowing exactly what your vehicle will do at that speed and using all of it and none more. Someone who had planned the exit in advance. Someone who knew this interchange. He pulled back onto the highway. He drove south toward Tucson at 68 miles an hour with his left wrist aching from the evidence strap, and the basketball podcast turned off, and the October desert running past the windows in the flat morning light, and he thought about the red hair the whole way. The airport express shuttle from the Flying J reached the I-10 Chandler corridor at 8:14, running 40 minutes behind schedule due to a second mechanical issue that the driver Hector had described to the passengers as a routine sensor reset, and that had required a 20-minute phone call to the shuttle company's roadside assistance line, and the participation of a man in a parking lot in Tempe with a diagnostic scanner. Dobie Pruitt had used the delay productively. He had finished the Bud Light. He had eaten a package of beef jerky from the Flying J that he'd bought during the delay, and which he would regret, he suspected, somewhere around Tucson. He had dozed for 12 minutes and woken with the particular sharp alertness of a man whose body has learned to sleep fast in transit and extract what rest it can from whatever surface is available. The shuttle came south on I-10 and passed the Chandler rest stop, and Pruitt looked out the window and saw the 2 Chandler PD patrol units in the lot, lights going, and the Loomis van with the rear doors still open, and a plainclothes person with a notepad talking to a man in a Loomis uniform who was sitting on the bumper of a patrol car with a blanket around his shoulders that he did not appear to need given that it was 89 degrees. Pruitt looked at this. He looked at the open van doors. He looked at the man on the patrol car bumper. He thought about the Flying J, and the woman in the Loomis passenger seat, and the elevated angle of the on-ramp, and the jaw that did not match the wig. He thought about the Bud Light decision, and whether it had been the correct one. The man next to him, the sun's cap, who had woken up somewhere around Tempe and spent the subsequent miles looking at his phone, said, "What happened there?" "Robbery, looks like," Pruitt said. "Armored truck?" "Courier van." The sun's cap looked at the receding scene through the rear window. That woman back there had a Loomis uniform on. Pruitt looked at him. "What woman?" Pruitt said. "At the Flying J, at the fuel pumps. I saw her through your window. I was looking for my phone and I leaned across." The sun's cap shrugged. "Big woman. Black hair. She looked wrong for the uniform." Pruitt looked at the man. He looked at the rest stop falling away behind them through the rear window. He thought about the 40 seconds on the on-ramp, and the window angle, and what he had decided, which was that he had a flight to catch, and that a woman who looked like that was probably having a morning that had already handed her enough. He thought about the open rear doors of the Loomis van. "Ha," Pruitt said. "You saw her too." "I'm thinking," Pruitt said. The shuttle ran south on I-10, and the rest stop went away behind them, and the Chandler development gave way to the open corridor between Metro Phoenix and the desert, the landscape opening up and flattening, the mountains reappearing on every horizon with the blue permanence of things that do not care what happens in the foreground. Pruitt looked out the window. He thought about the Loomis driver on the patrol car bumper with the unnecessary blanket. He thought about 9 words. I knew something was off about that woman. He thought about whether saying them would help anyone at this point, given that the van was open and empty, and the police were already there, and the shuttle was doing 72 south and had not slowed. He thought about his sister's refrigerator. He did not say the 9 words. He ate the last of the beef jerky. He looked out the window at the desert going past, and thought about what it meant to know something at the right time versus knowing it at the time you actually knew it, and whether there was a version of this morning where those two things had coincided, and whether that version had anything to do with him. He concluded that it did not, which was a conclusion he had arrived at before about other mornings, and which had the quality of being both true and not entirely satisfying. He looked out the window. The desert ran south. Chapter 3. Tell me about the hare, Paulson said. Tolliver told him about the hare. Paulson listened with a legal pad in front of him, and a pen in his hand that he did not use. He had 6 lines written on the pad already. Tolliver could read 3 of them from across the desk. Loomis ML 4419C, Chandler Rest Stop 0807, and Almeida, with a question mark that looked like it had been written before Tolliver arrived. Paulson listened the way he did everything, which was to give the thing his complete attention without indicating that he was doing so, the way a building looks when the structural work is entirely internal. His office occupied a mid-floor corner of the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Building on West Washington in Phoenix, which was a building that had been designed to project federal authority and had succeeded in projecting federal air conditioning instead, the kind of recycled, conditioned air that carried no information about the season or the temperature outside, and smelled faintly of carpet and the particular alkaline quality of bureaucratic paper. The office itself held a desk, 3 chairs, a monitor on an articulated arm, a whiteboard with nothing on it, and on the wall behind Paulson's left shoulder, a framed aerial photograph of the I-10 corridor between Phoenix and Tucson that someone had given him or he had bought, or that had been in the office when he got it, and that he had kept because it was the most accurate map of his professional life. Paulson was 52 years old. He had the compact, economical build of a man who has spent 30 years moving fast when necessary and standing still the rest of the time, and a face that had resolved itself into a specific expression. Not stern, not approachable, just present. The face of a man who is somewhere because he decided to be there and intends to remain until he has what he came for. His badge was on the desk to his right, not on his person, which was a detail Tolliver noted and could not fully interpret. He finished the account. Paulson wrote one more line on the pad. He capped the pen. Hair, Paulson said. You said brick red. Not orange, not auburn. Brick red, Tolliver said. Like he'd been in the sun his whole life, and the sun had settled on that one color and decided it was done. And the truck. Dark green F-150, extended cab. Pre-2012 body style, probably 08 or 09. V8, I heard it when he went up the on-ramp and it was not the stock motor. No front plate. The rear plate was mud-covered, maybe deliberately, I couldn't get a read. Paulson turned the monitor toward Tolliver without explanation. The screen showed a DMV photo against a white background. A man in his early 40s, face forward, the expression of someone who is cooperating with a bureaucratic requirement and nothing more. Square jaw, wide-set eyes, brick red hair cut short on the sides and somewhat shorter on top than it had been on the highway, but the same color unmistakably. Below the photo, Almeida, John Carlos. Dobb listed. An Arizona driver's license address in Tempe that Tolliver suspected no longer applied. Jack Almeida, Paulson said. Goes by Red when people call him anything. 4 jobs on the Phoenix-Tucson corridor in 3 years. The Loomis job this morning is the 4th. He pulled the monitor back. The first 3, he worked differently every time. Different method, different crew configuration, different target profile. No pattern that held between jobs. Except the corridor, Tolliver said. Paulson looked at him. Except the corridor. He knows the I-10 like a man who has driven it every day of his adult life, because he has. He knows every interchange, every rest stop, every camera blind spot, every county line where jurisdiction changes. He knows the Loomis crew rotation because he researched it, the cargo manifest because he found a way into the system, and the precise window in a 16-year employee's Tuesday routine. He paused. This morning is the first time he used a disguise. At least the first time we know of. The wig was from Spirit Halloween, Tolliver said. I know. How? We pulled the rest stop cameras. He took it off in the lot. Stuffed it in his cargo pocket. There's 3 frames of usable footage, profile, before he got in the truck. Paulson opened a desk drawer and removed a printed still, grainy, the timestamp in the lower right corner, showing 8 hours 7 minutes and 44 seconds, and slid it across the desk. Jack Almeida in jeans and a gray t-shirt in a rest stop parking lot, right hand going to the right cargo pocket, brick red hair. The uniform went in the lot too. And a canvas tote. Loomis branded. He left them next to the open doors, which tells you something. He left them, Tolliver said. He had a change of clothes in the tote, and he changed in the van during the transfer. He didn't need the uniform anymore, so he left it. He was done with it. Paulson took the photograph back. Man who thinks about what he needs and what he's done with. He doesn't carry weight he doesn't have a use for. Tolliver thought about the pursuit. About the F-150, taking the 202 Cloverleaf at 90, and the geometry of it. Not a panic choice, a planned one. The exit timed to produce exactly the result it had produced. He thought about how long you would have to drive a specific interchange to know precisely what a pursuer's front-wheel drive car would do in that radius at that speed. He let me see the hair, Tolliver said. Paulson looked at him. On the highway. I was close enough. He was pulling away, and I could see it through the rear glass. He didn't have a hat on. Tolliver thought about this. He had to know I was back there. He had to have seen me in his mirrors. What's your point? A man who plans like that, who knows exactly when to take an exit, if he wanted to lose me before I got a look at him, he could have. He could have taken any of 3 exits before the 202. Tolliver looked at the photograph on the desk. He let me see the hair. Paulson was quiet for a moment. He looked at the aerial photograph on the wall. I've been watching Jack Almeida work this corridor for 3 years, he said. He lets people see what he wants them to see. When he shows you something, the first question is always whether he wanted you to see it. He picked up the pen. Write your incident report. Field office will want it before noon. Tolliver stood. The envelope, Paulson said. Tolliver had the manila envelope under his arm, the evidence strap still around his left wrist, the plastic edge of it worn a groove into his skin over the past 2 hours. He set it on Paulson's desk. Paulson looked at it. He looked at the 3 layers of evidence tape, all intact, Tolliver's signature across each one. Good, Paulson said. He meant the signatures. He did not say anything about the pursuit. He did not have to. Walter Garnett's office at Meridian Logistics Solutions occupied the northeast corner of the 6th floor of a glass tower on North Central Avenue in Phoenix that housed 14 other companies, none of which had any awareness of what Meridian did for the 2 clients that mattered. The office had a glass wall facing the corridor and a second glass wall facing north, through which, on a clear morning, and October mornings in Phoenix were clear with the persistence of a season that had made up its mind, you could see the mountains above Scottsdale sitting blue and definite on the horizon, and beyond them the suggestion of higher mountains that were the beginning of a different kind of Arizona. Garnett was not looking at the mountains. He was looking at a spreadsheet on a monitor that was larger than any spreadsheet required to be, because Garnett had learned early in his career that a large monitor projected the appearance of serious work, and the appearance of serious work produced in the people who walked past his glass wall a disinclination to interrupt him. He sat with good posture in an ergonomic chair that had cost the firm $400, and that his lower back required, and that he had been careful never to draw attention to, because the lower back situation was one of several personal details that Garnett had decided were irrelevant to the image he maintained at Meridian. The spreadsheet showed the Meridian Logistics active account register. Garnett had been staring at line item ML4419C for 40 minutes. The declared value field read $1,800,000. The internal manifest value field, which was a column only Garnett could see in this version of the document because he had set the permissions, read $900,000. The gap between those two numbers was the same gap it had been for the previous 7 shipments he had processed this way over the past 18 months, and on the previous 7 occasions the gap had closed without incident. The shipment arrived. The Pacific Bonding Group policy paid out at declared value. Meridian invoiced at actual value, and the difference, $900,000 in this case, settled into an account in the Cayman Islands through a chain of transactions that Garnett had designed himself, and that he was genuinely proud of, not because he would have said so, but because the design was elegant, and he had an appreciation for elegance in the abstract. This morning, the shipment had not arrived. The shipment had been taken off a Loomis van at a rest stop in Chandler by a man Garnett did not know, and could not immediately connect to anyone he did know, and it was now in the possession of that man wherever that man was, which meant the cash existed in a condition that Garnett had not planned for. Not delivered, not audited, not processed, simply gone, which was a condition that had different implications depending on what happened next. If the cash was recovered, the audit happened. The audit found the declared value discrepancy. The discrepancy led to Pacific Bonding Group, and Pacific Bonding Group led eventually and inevitably to the Cayman account, and the Cayman account led to Garnett. If the cash stayed gone, Pacific Bonding Group paid the claim at declared value, Meridian invoiced the Cartel's shell account at actual value, and the discrepancy settled the way it had settled 7 times before, which was cleanly and without observation. Garnett needed the cash to stay gone. He understood this was a specific and unusual thing to need. He was a man whose entire professional self-concept rested on the management of contingencies. He was good at anticipating problems, good at building systems that contained them, good at the particular skill of not being in the room when something went wrong. What he had not built a system for was a stranger stealing the shipment before it arrived, because a stranger stealing the shipment was the kind of event that sat in the scenario space beyond the edge of the planning he had done, in the territory of things he had decided were unlikely enough not to require a contingency. He had been wrong. He acknowledged this with the specific, interior silence of a man who does not say things out loud that he does not want to hear himself say. He opened a new browser window. He opened Signal. He typed a message to a contact listed in his phone under the name of a hardware store that no longer existed. The message read, "Need to talk. Today." He sent it. He went back to the spreadsheet. He looked at the gap between $1,800,000 and $900,000 and understood that this gap, which had been an asset for 18 months, had become a liability the moment the cash stopped moving toward its destination, and that the only way to convert it back to an asset was to ensure the cash never reached anyone who would count it. He looked at the mountains through the north wall of his office. He thought about patience and paperwork, which were his strengths. He thought about what came after patience and paperwork, which were not. The 3 storage facilities were in Gilbert, in Mesa, and in a strip of light industrial blocks in Apache Junction that sat between a propane dealer and a landscape supply yard, and that had the quality of a place that had been built for a purpose and then left to that purpose without further attention. Jack had rented the units 3 weeks before, walk-in, cash, a different name at each facility, a different vehicle each time. He had staggered the rental dates so that no cross-referencing of rental records across facilities would produce 3 hits on the same week. He was at the Apache Junction facility now, locking the roll-up door of Unit 31 with a padlock he had bought that morning at a hardware store 2 miles away. Inside the unit, 1 Pelican case, 6 stacks of banded 20s pulled from the second case and repacked, $300,000 total, wrapped in a contractor trash bag, and placed inside a large duffel bag that he had loaded onto the metal shelf along the unit's north wall and covered with a tarp. Tag had taken the Gilbert unit. Peso had taken the Mesa one. This was not because Jack trusted either of them. It was because splitting the cash into 3 locations meant that no single person could take everything, including Jack. If something happened to him before he could consolidate, the other 2/3 existed. This was the logic of redundancy, which Jack applied to everything the same way he applied it to exit routes. Not because he expected to need it, but because the cost of building it in was lower than the cost of needing it and not having it. He locked the unit. He stood in the gravel lot of the Apache Junction storage and self-store and looked at his phone. 2 texts from Tag, sent in the last 40 minutes. The first said, "Done. Unit locked." The second said, "There a place to eat around here, just asking." Jack did not respond. He looked at the time. He looked at the F-150, backed into the last space in the lot along the east fence, the tonneau cover closed, and the bed empty now except for the rubber liner. He looked at the highway visible above the fence line, US 60 running east-west, the traffic moving in both directions with the mid-morning density of a corridor that had not yet hit its peak. He needed gas. There was a Circle K on the highway a half-mile west. He had passed it on the way in. Dobie Pruitt was sitting on the curb in front of the Circle K when Jack pulled into the lot. He was sitting on the curb because the bench that normally occupied the front of the building was occupied by a man and a dog, and Pruitt had a complicated relationship with dogs that had started with a cattle dog in Coolidge 6 years ago and had not resolved in his favor. He sat on the curb with a 32-ounce Polar Pop, Diet Pepsi, which Pruitt drank in the same spirit that a man takes a multivitamin, not because he believed in it, but because it felt like a gesture in the right direction, and his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man reviewing the morning's events and finding them only partially satisfactory. He was, it turned out, on his way back from the airport. His sister had called at 9:15 and told him that she needed to push his visit by a week because her ex-husband was coming to take the kids for the weekend, and the guest room, which the ex-husband had historically treated as his room when available, needed to be unavailable. Pruitt had turned around at Sky Harbor's Terminal 4 departure level without checking in, and had taken the airport shuttle back to the Flying J and collected his car, which was a '04 Civic with a driver's window that required manual assistance to close completely, and had driven east on the Superstition freeway toward Apache Junction because he had a high school friend in Gold Canyon who owed him $150 and who, it had occurred to Pruitt during the 40-minute drive from the airport, was probably home on a Tuesday. He had stopped at the Circle K for the Polar Pop. He was building the text to the Gold Canyon friend when he became aware of the dark green F-150 pulling into the lot and the man who got out of it. The man was wearing jeans and a dark gray t-shirt and work boots and had brick red hair that the October sun hit and turned a brighter version of itself. And he walked to the pump with the straight-line economy of motion of a man who is going somewhere and knows exactly where it is. Pruitt looked at the hair. He looked at the F-150. He looked at the shoulders on the man, which were the shoulders of someone who had, at some point in his life, done work that built shoulders that way. He looked at the jaw. He thought about the woman in the Loomis van. He thought about what the sun's cap had said. Big woman, black hair, she looked wrong for the uniform. He thought about the 40 seconds on the on-ramp, and the window angle, and the jaw below the wig. He thought about the Loomis van with the doors open at the Chandler rest stop, and the driver with the unnecessary blanket, and the 2 Chandler PD units with their lights going. He looked at the man at the pump. The man swiped a card, selected regular, and lifted the pump handle and put it in the truck's tank, and stood with one hand on the pump and the other in his pocket, looking at his phone. Prout stood up from the curb. He walked to the pump island. The man heard him coming, or didn't hear him, but registered him the way a person registers approach, the slight adjustment of posture that is not defensive but is not relaxed either. He looked up from the phone. Green eyes. Brick red hair. A face that had been in the Arizona sun long enough for the sun to have an opinion about it. "Morning," Prout said. The man looked at him. Dobie Prout. He extended his hand, because extending his hand was what he did when he said his name, in the same automatic sequence. "I'm not doing anything." He said this because it seemed relevant. The man shook his hand. He had a grip that closed once and let go, the grip of a man who is not performing the handshake. "Jack," he said. "You hear about the thing on I-10 this morning?" Prout said. "What thing?" "Loomis courier van. Chandler rest stop. Somebody took 2 cases of cash off the back." Prout looked at the pump like he was thinking about something else. "I was on a shuttle. Came right past it on the way back, saw the police cars." "Huh," Jack said. "Big score. I heard somebody on the radio say 900,000. Prout drank from the Polar Pop. "Here's what I can't get past. There was a woman on the van. In the passenger seat. I saw her at the Flying J before the shuttle left. I had a window angle on their windshield. Big woman, black hair, but the..." He gestured at his own jaw. "The face. The jaw. The hands. You know what I mean." "Not really. It looked like a man in a wig, is what I mean. Which I realize sounds..." He circled his hand. "But there it is." The pump clicked. Jack pulled the nozzle out and replaced it on the pump, and put the gas cap back on, and did these things in the order he always did them, each motion complete before the next. "I didn't call it in," Prout said. "At the time. I had a flight. Which I ended up not catching anyway, so..." "So you're telling me now?" "I'm telling you because you're the first person I've talked to who seemed like they might have a use for it." Prout looked at the F-150. He looked at Jack. He looked at the highway. "I don't know exactly what use. I'm working that part out." Jack looked at him for a moment, with the level, assessing quality of a man running a probability. He looked at the Polar Pop, and the Gold Canyon friend text half-written on the phone, and the Civic with the bad driver's window parked at the edge of the lot, and the expression on Prout's face, which was the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion through a process he could not entirely reconstruct, but which felt correct. "Come inside," Jack said. "I'll get you a coffee." "I've got the Polar Pop." "I'll get you a coffee anyway." Prout looked at the Polar Pop. He considered the offer with the brief pragmatism of a man who has learned not to refuse things on principle. "Okay," he said. They went inside. The Circle K on US 60 in Apache Junction had 4 tables in the back corner near the hot food station. The tables bolted to the floor, in the way of a business that has learned from experience that tables which can be moved will be moved. And Jack sat at the one nearest the window with a coffee he did not particularly want and watched Prout work through the morning's events in the way Prout worked through things, at length, in real time, with the associative thoroughness of a man for whom the telling and the thinking were the same process. He talked about the shuttle. He talked about the Flying J. He talked about the wig, the specific quality of it, black and straight against the red complexion, the way it sat on the head at an angle that suggested it had made a decision the head did not agree with. He talked about the jaw, and the hands, and the shoulders in the Loomis uniform, and the 40 seconds on the elevated on-ramp and the window angle, and his decision not to call it in, which he revisited with the methodical self-examination of a man trying to determine at exactly which point he had made the choice that most affected the outcome, and whether that point had offered a genuinely different option or just the appearance of one. Jack drank his coffee. Prout described the woman in the van, and the woman described was Jack. The jaw, the shoulders, the hands on the logistics tablet, the wig sitting on his head like a conviction that the head was arguing with. And Jack listened to the description with the same interior stillness he brought to everything that required him to be somewhere other than where he was being described as being. The hands, Prout said. He was on the second coffee now, which Jack had gotten up and bought without being asked, and which Prout had accepted in the same spirit as the first, briefly, pragmatically, without excess gratitude. That's the part one keep coming back to. The hands were a man's hands. Not like a man's hands, not hands that reminded you of a man's hands. A man's hands. Specific work done to them. I've done enough construction to know what work looks like when it's living in somebody's hands. What kind of work? Jack said. Multiple kinds. Prout tapped the table. Physical and mechanical both. Not just heavy lifting. Somebody who uses tools and uses them right. Huh. The thing is, Prout said, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this. I didn't call it in when I could have. The police are already involved. I'm sitting in an Apache Junction Circle K. He looked at his coffee. I feel like I'm a witness to something I can't identify, and I'm describing it to someone who has not identified themselves as having any particular relationship to the thing I'm describing. Jack said, I'm buying you coffee. You are buying me coffee, Prout said. Which is a thing people do when they want someone to keep talking. Jack looked at him. Prout looked back. He had the eyes of a man whose faculty for caution had been somewhat compressed by a decade of bourbon and bad luck, and mornings that started at 7 with a 24-ounce Bud Light, but whose fundamental read on people had survived this compression intact, operating at a lower altitude than it once had but still functional. What time is it? Jack said. 10:40. You have somewhere to be. Gold Canyon, eventually. Friend owes me money. Gold Canyon's 20 minutes. He's not always home. Jack put his cup down. He looked out the window at the F-150 at the pump island. He looked at the US 60 traffic. He looked at the mountains east of Apache Junction, which were the Superstitions, the western face of them, a wall of volcanic rock and vertical desert that sat against the sky and offered nothing in the way of reassurance. He had been watching those mountains for 3 weeks from various vantage points while planning the route out of the East Valley, if the planning required a route out of the East Valley. He looked at Prout. Prout was looking at the mountains too, without any particular agenda. You going to call the police? Jack said. Prout considered this. With what? He said. I saw a woman at a gas station who looked like a man in a wig. The police have a rest stop full of evidence, and a Loomis driver and a Chandler PD unit already on it. He turned his cup on the table. What I have is a description of a woman who may or may not exist, that I saw for 40 seconds from an elevated angle through a windshield. He looked at Jack. Plus, I already did not call it in when the calling would have mattered, so the window on that feels like it's closed. That's a reasonable position, Jack said. I have them, occasionally. Jack left a 5 on the table and stood. Prout stood too, with the particular care of a man whose knees had opinions about cold surfaces. They walked to the door and out into the October heat that had built while they were inside, and that hit them both in the face with the blunt directness of an Arizona morning that had decided it was afternoon. Prout looked at the F-150. He looked at Jack. He looked at the green F-150 with no front plate, and the rebuilt V8, and the matte black tonneau cover that sat flush with the bed rails, and said nothing about what had been in the bed 2 hours ago. "Nice truck," he said. "Thanks," Jack said. "What year?" "09." Prout nodded. He looked at the truck for another moment, with the assessing eye of a man who has loaded and unloaded enough truck beds to know when one has had recent use. He looked at the tonneau cover. He looked at the cargo anchors on the bed rail, which showed the faint bright marks of a ratchet strap recently removed. He looked at the highway. "Well," Prout said. He picked up his phone and the half-written text to the Gold Canyon friend. "I'm going to go see if Lonnie's home." "Good luck," Jack said. "He's probably not home," Prout said. "He's never home when I go to see him. I don't know why I keep going." He walked to the Civic and got in and ran the window up with both hands and started the engine on the third try and pulled out of the lot onto US 60 heading east. Jack watched the Civic go. He stood in the Circle K lot in the October heat and watched the car get small in the distance and thought about what Prout had said and what Prout had not said and the specific quality of what Prout had looked at when he looked at the truck bed, and what a man who looked at things like that and said nothing about them was likely to do next. He thought about it for a moment. Then he got in the F-150 and drove east on US 60 toward the Superstitions, which sat on the horizon with the patience of things that have been there a long time and expect to continue. Chapter 4. The problem with the floral maxi dress, and there were multiple problems with the floral maxi dress, was that it had been designed for a woman whose center of gravity occupied a different zip code than Jack's. The designer had imagined someone narrow through the shoulders and wider below the waist, which was a shape that the dress rewarded with a clean drape and a modest hem, and the dress had not been consulted about what happened when the proportions ran the other way. On Jack, the shoulders filled the upper bodice past its engineering tolerance, and the hem, which on the intended wearer would have cleared the floor by 4 inches, cleared his boot tops by 3, and suggested less a dress than a garment that had given up on certain aspirations. He'd found it at the Goodwill on McDowell Road in Phoenix for $4, which he paid at a self-checkout kiosk without interacting with anyone, sandwiched between a walk and a set of curtain rods, as though all 3 items were part of the same transaction. The denim jacket came from the Spirit Halloween on Thomas Road, which was running a clearance on everything that had not sold in the 2 weeks before Halloween, and that now occupied the front door discount bins in a state of marked-down optimism. It was women's denim, a size large, constructed for a woman of large dimensions, large in the way that did not include the shoulder width that Jack required, so the jacket sat on him with the front panels open because the alternative involved the kind of structural stress that produced audible results. He left it open. The wig was auburn this time. He had driven past the same Spirit Halloween twice, looking for the wig section, which had been relocated to the back of the store since his previous visit, and restocked with a different inventory, the black straight hair units largely gone, replaced by a clearance selection that ran toward Halloween-specific aesthetics. He had considered and rejected a copper red witch wig and a platinum blonde beehive before settling on the auburn, which was at least a color that existed in nature. It came in a bag with the manufacturer's name on it, and a photograph of a woman with a bright professional smile who wore the wig with the assurance of someone who had made the choice on purpose. The wig sat on Jack's head at an angle that suggested a competing opinion. He adjusted it in the Goodwill parking lot, using the rear-view mirror of the F-150, and arrived at a position that was defensible and stopped there, because the margin between defensible and better was not available to him in this mirror at this angle, and he had a bus to catch. He looked at himself. He had looked at himself in the Days Inn mirror in the black wig 4 days ago, and arrived at the assessment that he looked like a witness. The auburn wig, the floral dress, the open denim jacket, and the October sun hitting all of it at once produced a different assessment. He looked like something that had not come together the way anyone had planned, but that had gotten this far, and did not see any obvious route back. He got on the bus. The Greyhound from Phoenix to Tucson left the downtown terminal on East Buckeye at 9:45 and made 2 stops, one in Casa Grande, one in Eloy, before arriving at the Tucson station on East 11th at approximately noon, depending on what the 2 stops produced and whether the I-10 corridor between Casa Grande and Eloy was running clear, which it usually was except when a freight truck shed a load in the right lane, which had happened twice in the past 6 months and had added 40 minutes to the run each time. Jack had taken this bus twice before, both times in his own clothes, both times for reasons that were not the reason he was taking it today. He knew the seat configuration: 2 and 1 across the aisle, 47 seats, the overhead bins shallow and useless for anything larger than a laptop bag. And he knew the particular social ecology of the Greyhound on a weekday morning, which ran toward people who were traveling because they had to, rather than because they wanted to. Construction workers going south for jobs, older people who had decided that the bus was the sensible option, a category of traveler who needed to be between Phoenix and Tucson without producing a record of having made the trip. He understood that he himself occupied that last category, which was part of why the bus and not a rental car. Rental cars left records. The F-150 he had left 2 miles from the terminal in a public parking garage on Jefferson, backed into a corner space on the 3rd level, the tonneau cover locked, the rebuilt V8 under a hood that looked identical to stock. He boarded at the back of the line, which was 4 people. He showed the printed ticket, cash purchase from a kiosk, no name required, and moved down the aisle to a window seat 2 rows from the rear. He sat. He put the canvas tote on his lap. Different tote. No Loomis branding, a plain blue grocery bag from a Fry's in Mesa, and looked out the window at the terminal's drop-off lane and the people moving through it and thought about what he needed from Tucson and how long it would take to get it. The bus filled. Not to capacity, maybe 30 of the 47 seats, and in the 10 minutes before departure the passengers settled into the particular arrangement that people settle into when given a choice of seats on a bus, which was the arrangement of maximum personal space, each person taking a window seat and treating the aisle seat as storage until the bus ran out of window seats, which it did not quite do today. A man took the aisle seat next to Jack 3 minutes before departure. Jack registered him the way he registered everything in an environment he was operating in. Compact, square-built, brown suit that fit well, a carry-on bag that went in the overhead bin without struggle, a phone in his hand that he checked twice and pocketed before the bus moved. Mid-40s. He moved with the specific economy of a man accustomed to airports, and had brought that economy to the bus station without adjusting it down, which was the first thing that told Jack something about him. The second thing was the way he scanned the bus when he boarded. Not quickly but thoroughly, working front to back. The practiced eyes-through-room pattern of a man for whom entering a space and assessing it were the same action. Former law enforcement, Jack read him. Or still law enforcement, but operating outside a structure. The man sat. He looked at his phone one more time, and put it away, and looked at the road through the windshield, as the bus pulled out of the terminal and made the turn onto Buckeye. He said nothing for the first 12 miles. Then, long way to travel by bus. He said it, to the windshield, or to the space between himself and the windshield, with the tone of a man opening a door and leaving it to whoever was on the other side to decide whether to walk through. Jack looked at the road too. "It's fine," he said. He kept his voice where he kept it. That flat middle register, not high, not low. The voice of a woman who found small talk neither interesting nor objectionable. "Frank Olds," the man said. He said it the way a man says his name who has decided the door is open. "I'm down from San Diego." "Clara Bowles." Jack looked at Olds for just long enough to be civil. "Phoenix." "Visiting Tucson." "Family." Olds nodded. He had a face built for affability. Open, even-featured. The kind of face that produced in other people the feeling that they were talking to someone who genuinely wanted to hear what they had to say, which was a quality Jack had encountered before in men whose careers had required them to make strangers feel heard. He wore it the way a practiced liar wears a true face. Not consciously, not effortfully, just as a condition of being in the world. "I do insurance work," Olds said. "Claims investigation. Down here on a case." "What kind of case?" Jack said, because a woman on a bus who had just been told this would ask. "Cargo theft." Olds settled back in his seat. "You hear about the Loomis thing in Chandler? 4 days ago." "On the radio," Jack said. "That's mine. Or my firm's, Pacific Bonding Group, out of San Diego. We insured the shipment." He said it with the specific neutrality of a man who is about to say more and is watching to see if interest is present before he commits to it. Jack looked out the window at the I-10 opening up south of the city, the development falling away, and the desert coming back in. "A lot of money," Jack said. 900,000. Give or take. Olds paused a fraction of a second on give or take, which Jack heard. The carrier declared it higher, which is a separate issue. "My job is the theft." Jack let a silence sit. Olds filled it. This was what he did. Jack had read this in the first 12 miles and confirmed it now. A man who was comfortable with silence in a way that produced discomfort in other people, and who had learned to let other people fill silences as a technique for producing information. Jack did not fill the silence. He waited until it had been long enough that filling it was the natural thing to do, and then he said, "Do you know who did it?" Olds turned his head and looked at Jack for the first time since he'd sat down, a direct look, assessing, brief. He appeared satisfied with what he saw, which told Jack that what Olds saw was Clara Bowles and not Jack Almeida, and that the auburn wig and the open denim jacket and the floral dress were doing at least the minimum of what he'd asked them to do. "Working on it," Olds said. He turned back to the road. "The primary subject is a man named Almeida. Red Almeida. Works the Phoenix-Tucson corridor, has for years. But here's what's interesting." He leaned back and crossed his arms in the posture of a man arriving at the part of the story he finds genuinely engaging. The manifest shows a female courier in the passenger seat of that van. Name on the roster was Clara Bowles, Loomis employee, but she was nowhere near that van that morning. Her credentials were cloned. Jack looked out the window. "So we have a man, Almeida, known to law enforcement, description circulating, and we have a female accomplice who used the van's own credentialing system to put herself in the passenger seat." Olds uncrossed his arms. "Which means, whoever she is, she has access to systems that most people don't know exist. Or she knows someone who does." "That's clever," Jack said. "It is," Olds agreed. "We have a partial description from the Loomis driver, and there's a witness, shuttle passenger, who reported a woman at the Flying J fuel pumps before the run. Big, broad-shouldered, black wig. The shuttle driver remembers her too." Jack watched the desert. "My theory," Olds said, and paused with the weight of a man who has said "my theory" in a lot of rooms and has learned to pause after it, is that the woman is someone who works in logistics or transport security. Someone who knows how armored courier systems are structured from the inside. The credential clone is too clean for a first attempt. She's done this before, or she knows someone who has. He said she with complete conviction. He had a file. The file said she. The file had been built from the manifest, the Loomis driver's statement, the shuttle passenger account, and 2 camera stills from the Flying J that showed the passenger side of a Loomis van through a windshield at an angle that resolved to female presenting, black hair, large frame. The file did not say Jack Almeida because the file was built correctly from everything except the one fact that changed everything. Jack let him have it. What does she get out of it? Jack said. Cut of the cash, presumably. Almeida's solo on the operational end, the transfer, the crew outside the vehicle. She's the access point. He provides the muscle, she provides the inside. Olds looked at his hands. It's a good partnership structure. Minimizes the number of people who need to know the full picture. Does it usually work out? That kind of arrangement? Olds smiled at the road ahead. It was an honest smile, a man who found the question interesting. Almost never. Somebody always talks. Either the money produces a disagreement, or somebody gets scared, or somebody decides their cut should be somebody else's cut. He glanced at Jack. What do you do? Admin work, Jack said. Medical office. Long commute. My mother's in Tucson. Ah. Olds settled back. Mine too. Well, was. She passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Jack said. She was 91, Olds said. She was ready. I think she was more ready than any of us. He looked at the mountains south of Casa Grande, coming up on the right, the Santa Catalinas still an hour away but visible on the horizon as a blue serration. That's the thing about this part of the country. The distances. Everything's an hour away, minimum. You spend a lot of time in transit. You get used to it, Jack said. I'm from Cleveland, originally. I never got used to it. Olds picked up the phone and looked at it and put it back. You grew up here? All my life. Olds looked at him. He did it with the same direct brevity as before, the assessing quality, and then looked away. And Jack understood that the look was not suspicion. It was the trained habit of a man cataloging faces, building an index, not because he was looking for anything in particular, but because 20 years of doing it had made it automatic. It shows, Olds said. You carry yourself like someone who knows the ground. Jack looked at the I-10 running south through the Sonoran Desert toward Tucson and said, You have to out here. Olds nodded as though this were wisdom, which, coming from Jack, it was. The text from Garnett's cutout arrived on Peso's phone at 11:17 on a Wednesday morning, while Peso was at a carniceria in Mesa eating a breakfast burrito that the woman at the counter had made fresh, and that he was working through with the focused attention of a man who has decided that this is the best part of the day and intends to honor it. The cutout was a paralegal named Reyes, no relation to the Loomis driver, who worked at Garnett's firm, and who had been asked to send the message on the understanding that it was a routine vendor communication, which it was in the sense that all things are routine when you do not know what they mean. The message read, Mr. Garnett would like to discuss a finder's arrangement re. the Meridian ML4419C items. 10,000 available for location information. Please confirm interest. Peso read this 3 times. He ate another bite of the burrito. He thought about $10,000, which was the number on the screen, and about what $10,000 required from him, which was location information, and about what location information he had, which was the Mesa storage unit address and the general shape of Jack's method, which was worth something even if it was not everything Garnett thought he was buying. He thought about what Jack had said about splitting the cash. He thought about Tag, who had told him at the Gilbert facility, standing outside his unit with his key in the padlock, and the specific expression of a man delivering a message he'd been asked to deliver, that they should not talk to anyone about the locations. Tag had said it with the gravity of someone repeating instructions they believed in, which had the effect of making Peso believe them less. He finished the burrito. He opened Venmo. He typed, confirming interest, and sent it, and then found Garnett's cutout number and typed the Mesa storage facility address, 4710 East Main, Mesa, Unit 47, and sent that too before he had time to apply the kind of thinking that would have told him this was the kind of decision that produces consequences faster than the money that preceded it. 30 seconds later, Venmo showed a notification. $500 received from Reyes Paralegal. Peso looked at the notification. He looked at the $500. He thought about the $10,000 that had been offered, and the $500 that had arrived, and the math between those two numbers, which was a math that should have told him something. He finished his orange juice. He paid for the burrito, and walked out into the Mesa morning and drove to a bar on Dobson that opened at 11, because he needed to think, and he thought better with a beer in front of him, which was a thing he had believed for a long time, and which the evidence did not fully support, but which had survived the evidence because beliefs that feel true are more durable than beliefs that are. Tag Dunning drove to Apache Junction in the Silverado because he had Jack's address in Apache Junction, and because Peso had, in the process of describing the Venmo transaction at the bar on Dobson, mentioned that the arrangement seemed fine and that Tag was probably overreacting. Tag drove and thought about overreacting. He was not a man who generally overreacted. He was a man who reacted approximately in proportion to events, which put him in the category of people who are not given credit for their calibration, because the category does not produce notable stories. The Circle K had been a reaction. He would acknowledge that. But the Circle K had been a judgment error under time pressure and not an overreaction, which was a distinction he felt was important and that he had been making to himself for 4 days. The Silverado ran east on the Superstition freeway with the particular mechanical protest of an engine that had been maintained attentively but not recently, the exhaust note carrying a low harmonic that Tag had learned to ignore the way you learn to ignore a sound in a building you've lived in long enough. The October morning was clear, and the superstitions ahead of him were the particular shade of brown-red that they turned when the light was direct, the volcanic rock absorbing the sun and giving nothing back. Jack's place was a rental in Apache Junction, a stucco house on a dirt road east of the highway that Jack had been in for 2 years, and that looked from the road like every other stucco house on every other dirt road in the East Valley. Beige, low-roofed, a dead oleander along the south wall that no one had replaced and that had acquired, in its death, a sculptural quality it had lacked in life. Tag pulled in and got out. The F-150 was in the carport. Jack came to the door before Tag knocked, which meant he had seen the Silverado from inside and had come to the door rather than waiting, which was the kind of thing Jack did that made Tag feel that coming here had been the right decision. Peso took money from Garnett, Tag said. He said it the way he said things that needed saying, directly before he was inside, before the pleasantries that neither of them ever exchanged, but that Tag always felt were theoretically available. Jack stepped back from the door. Tag came inside. The house had the quality of a place where a man lived alone and did not find this remarkable. Clean, organized, sparse in a way that was not decorative but functional, the furniture arranged to leave clear lines from every room to the exit points. A Keurig on the kitchen counter. A legal pad on the table with 3 lines of writing on it. A large-scale topographic map of Maricopa County pinned to the wall beside the back door that Tag had seen before, and that always made him think Jack was planning something even when, as he understood in retrospect, Jack was planning something. "How much?" Jack said. He got 500 from them. Advance on 10,000. What did he give them? The Mesa unit. Jack went to the Keurig and put a pod in and pressed the button and stood with his back against the counter while it ran. When? This morning. He texted me after. Said he felt bad about it. He Venmo'd it. Yeah. Jack looked at the legal pad on the table. Venmo, he said again, the way a man repeats a word when the thing the word represents has stopped having anything to do with him. I know. Did you explain to him that Venmo? I know, Tag said. Yes. He knows. He did it anyway. He was at a bar. At 11 in the morning. They open at 11. Jack picked up the coffee. He drank it. He set the mug on the counter with the exactness of a man who puts things down where he intends to pick them up again. Where is he now? Still at the bar, last I knew. And the Mesa unit. Garnett's people will be there today. Or already are. Jack nodded once. He looked at the topographic map. He looked at the door. Jack, Tag said. Yeah. There's something on Peso? From anybody? A reward, or whatever, if he. He did not finish the sentence, because Jack was looking at him, and the look did not require the sentence to finish. That's not a question you asked me, Jack said. Tag looked at the floor. He looked at the Keurig. He looked at the topographic map, which he had always found easier to look at than Jack when Jack looked like this. Right, Tag said. But if it were a question, Jack said, the answer is I don't know what Pesos wanted for on his own account. You could look it up. Tag considered this for a moment, with the expression of a man storing something for later. He's got that thing in Glendale, Tag said. Go look it up, Jack said. The subpoena went to the Arizona Self-Storage Association's Regional Records Administrator at 2:17 in the afternoon, which was a Wednesday, which meant it hit a desk that was staffed and produced a response before the end of business. Paulson had called in a favor from a federal magistrate in Phoenix who owed him something from a 2019 case involving a car title fraud operation out of Scottsdale that had become considerably more complicated than it had started. The magistrate had signed the subpoena in 40 minutes, which was fast, and the records administrator had returned the responsive documents in 2 hours and change, which was also fast, and the documents showed storage unit registrations across 16 East Valley facilities from the past 30 days with a flag for cash payments, assumed names, and single-access accounts. Paulson sat at his desk in the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Building with the returned documents on his screen and a yellow legal pad, and worked through them the way he worked through everything, methodically, without hurry, the pen in his hand, making marks that represented specific decisions rather than notes. 18 hits on cash payments. He eliminated 8 on geography, too far west, too far north, outside the operational radius of a man who had gone east on the Loop 202 after the rest stop. 10 remaining. He pulled the registration names and cross-referenced them against DMV records, utility accounts, and the thin but real pattern of aliases that Jack Almeida had used across 4 years and 3 prior cases, a pattern Paulson had documented himself on a sheet of yellow paper that lived in a folder in his second desk drawer, because patterns were the thing that made a career in this work, and you kept the ones you built. 3 hits. 3 storage units in 3 different East Valley facilities, all registered within a 2-week window, all cash, all names that sat in the Almeida alias column at a distance of 2 or 3 degrees of separation, not the same names, not obvious, but built from the same small vocabulary of first names and surnames that Jack had been drawing on since at least 2020. Paulson wrote the 3 addresses on the legal pad. He looked at them. He thought about Jack Almeida, standing at a rest stop lot for a fraction of a second, letting a DIA agent in a government fusion close to within 3 car lengths, the brick-red hair visible through the F-150's rear glass. Letting him see it. He picked up his phone and called the marshal's field office in Mesa and told them to get eyes on 3 addresses without making contact or approach. Today, the field office said. An hour ago, Paulson said. He hung up. He looked at the aerial photograph of the I-10 corridor on the wall behind his left shoulder. He looked at the East Valley section of it, the tangle of freeways east of Phoenix, the grid giving way to the rougher geometry of Apache Junction and the Superstition wilderness beyond it, the mountains sitting at the edge of the frame in the photograph with the same patient indifference they sat at the edge of everything out there. He thought about where a man goes when 3 storage units are compromised. He thought about what the desert east of Apache Junction looked like from a topographic map versus what it looked like from the ground, which were 2 different things, and about a man who had been using that country for 4 years and who knew the difference. His phone rang. The Mesa field office. Unit 47 in Mesa, the agent said. East Main Facility. There's a lock on the door, but the unit's been accessed. Recent. How recent? The gravel in front of the door's been disturbed. Somebody drove in and backed out. The tire impressions look, a pause. Maybe today. This morning. The lock. A different lock than the one registered to the unit. Somebody swapped it. Paulson looked at the legal pad. The other 2 units. Checking now. He waited. Outside the building's north-facing windows, the October afternoon was doing what October afternoons in Phoenix did when they meant it, the light going orange and long, the mountains above Scottsdale turning purple, the whole valley lit up in the specific amber of a sun that was down to its last hour and knew it. Gilbert unit's clean, the agent said. Bases moved. Apache Junction unit, there's a padlock, registered name, looks undisturbed. But, Paulson said. Boot prints in the dirt outside the door. 2 different tread patterns. One recent, one older. Someone's been there twice. At least. Paulson looked at the legal pad. He looked at Apache Junction on the aerial photograph. Put eyes on the Apache Junction unit tonight, he said. Don't approach. Don't signal presence. I want to know if anyone comes back. He ended the call. He sat in his office in the long orange light and looked at the corridor map on his wall and thought about Jack Almeida on a Greyhound going somewhere, or in that F-150 going somewhere, or already ahead of the storage unit discovery and moving the cache again, which was the version of events that Paulson considered most likely because it was the version consistent with everything he knew about the way Jack Almeida operated. He picked up the pen. He wrote a 7th line on the legal pad. It read, he already knows. Chapter 5. The Gilbert Storage Facility was on East Warner Road in a light industrial block between a tile wholesaler and a commercial air conditioning repair yard, one of 14 identical facilities that the Arizona Self-Storage corporate office had built across the East Valley between 2015 and 2019, using the same architectural specifications and the same beige stucco and the same access code system that reset every 30 days with a 4-digit number that the management company texted to registered users, and that Peso had received 37 days ago when he'd rented Unit 14C under a name that was not his name. Frank Olds stood in front of Unit 14C at 8:40 on a Thursday morning and looked at the door. Peso stood beside him, looking at the same door with the specific internal stillness of a man who has brought someone to a place and is about to find out whether the place contains what he said it would contain. The door was down. The padlock was in place. The gravel in front of the unit showed no tire tracks. Nothing about the unit suggested recent access or disturbance or the presence of $900,000 in banded 20s, packed in 2 Pelican cases, which was what Peso had told Olds was in the unit when he'd taken the advance payment 2 days ago, and which was information Peso had received from Tag, who had received it from Jack, who had divided the cash into 3 storage units because Jack did not trust Tag or Peso and had been correct in that assessment. Olds looked at the door. He looked at Peso. "Open it," Olds said. Peso opened it. The unit was 5 by 10, climate-controlled at a monthly rate of $89, which Peso had paid in cash for 3 months up front. The interior was empty. Not empty in the sense of stripped or cleared, but empty in the sense of never having contained anything. The metal shelf along the north wall held dust. The concrete floor showed no scuff marks. The air carried the particular flat neutrality of conditioned air that has been conditioning nothing. Olds stepped inside. He looked at the shelf. He looked at the floor. He crouched and ran his hand across the concrete and stood and looked at his hand, which showed no dust because there was no dust to show because nothing had been placed on this floor in the time since the last cleaning, which had been performed by the facility management as part of their standard turnover protocol. He came back out. Peso was standing in the gravel with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man whose internal calculations have just resolved to a number he does not like. "When did you rent this?" Olds said. 3 weeks ago." "And when did you last see the cases in it?" Peso thought about the answer to this question, which was that he had never seen the cases in this unit because Jack had taken the Gilbert location and had given Tag the Mesa unit and Peso the Apache Junction unit. And what Peso had assumed when he provided the Gilbert address to Garnett's cutout was that the 3 units were all loaded and that giving up one of 3 was a manageable compromise that left the other 2/3 intact. What Peso understood now, standing in the gravel outside an empty climate-controlled unit on East Warner Road, was that Jack had either moved the Gilbert unit before Peso had given up the address or had never put anything in it in the first place, and that the $500 in Peso's Venmo account represented the full compensation for information that had been accurate in its geography and wrong in every way that mattered. "I thought it was here," Peso said. Olds looked at him for a moment with the level assessment of a man cataloging what kind of problem he was looking at. He appeared to arrive at a conclusion. "Stay available," Olds said. "Don't leave the state. If Pacific Bonding Group needs to reach you, they will." He walked to his rental car, a Nissan Altima Gray, the kind of car that rental fleets buy because they are invisible, and got in and drove out of the facility lot onto Warner Road without looking back. Peso stood in the gravel. He looked at the empty unit. He thought about Tag, who had warned him not to take Garnett's money, and who had been right, and about Jack, who had split the cash into 3 units and had known exactly what he was doing when he'd done it, and about the specific shape of being played by someone who had never once indicated that playing you was on their agenda. He took out his phone. He opened Venmo. He looked at the $500 transaction from Reyes Paralegal and thought about whether $500 was the market rate for learning something you should have known already, and concluded that it probably was. The 2 men Walter Garnett hired came from a Scottsdale security firm called Southwestern Executive Protection Services, which was a name that suggested bodyguards for visiting executives, and turned out to mean 2 veterans in their late 30s who had left the military with skills that translated poorly to civilian employment and had found a market for those skills in the particular economy of men who needed things done that required not asking too many questions about why. Their names were Cordova and Milk. Garnett had met them once in his office on a Wednesday afternoon and had provided them with the information he had: a description of Jack Almeida, a partial plate number from a rest stop camera still, a geographic radius based on the storage unit locations, and an offer of $20,000 for the return of 2 Pelican cases containing cash that Garnett described as misappropriated company funds and that Cordova and Milk understood without being told were something else. They understood it was something else because men who hire private security to retrieve misappropriated company funds generally involve law enforcement first and private security second, and Garnett had been very clear that law enforcement was not to be involved, which was the kind of clarity that told you everything you needed to know about the nature of the funds. They had taken the job. They had worked the problem the way professionals work problems, starting with the information they had and building outward. The partial plate led to a DMV registration query through a contact Milk had at a title insurance firm in Mesa. The registration query led to a make and model, F-150 dark green 2009. The storage facility addresses gave them a geographic center, Apache Junction eastward. They had driven the corridor for 2 days looking for the truck and had found it on the 3rd day, parked outside a diner on US 60 east of Apache Junction called the Buckhorn Grill. They parked across the street in the rented Expedition, white, late model, the kind of vehicle that looks official without specifying what it's official for, and waited. Milk was behind the wheel. Cordova rode passenger. They had coffee from a Circle K 2 miles back, and the particular alert patience of men who have done a lot of waiting in vehicles and have learned to treat it as a professional skill rather than a deficit. "How do you want to do this?" Milk said. "Wait until he comes out. Approach in the lot. Show presence. He's one person, we're 2. Most people make the math work without it getting complicated. And if he doesn't?" Cordova looked at the Buckhorn Grill. "Then it gets complicated." They waited 23 minutes. The door of the Buckhorn Grill opened, and Jack Almeida came out. He had a coffee in his left hand and a paper bag in his right, and he moved with the straight-line economy of a man walking to his vehicle with the particular focus of someone whose vehicle is the only objective. He was halfway to the F-150 when he stopped. He looked at the Expedition. He looked at Cordova and Milk, sitting in the front seats. He looked at them for 2 seconds, which was long enough to read what they were. Not law enforcement, not casual. 2 men in a rented vehicle across from his truck, who had the posture and the positioning of people waiting for him specifically. He turned around. He walked back into the Buckhorn Grill. "Shit," Milk said. Cordova already had his door open. "Back entrance. Go around." They got out. Milk went left around the building. Cordova went through the front door into the diner, which was a long, narrow space with a counter on the right, and booths on the left, and a kitchen visible through a window at the back. The counter had 6 stools, 4 of them occupied. The booths had 9 tables, 2 occupied. There was no red-haired man in a gray t-shirt anywhere in the visible space. The server, a woman in her 60s with the efficient posture of someone who has worked this counter for a long time, looked at Cordova with the neutral assessment of a professional evaluating whether this is a customer or a problem. "Kitchen," Cordova said. "Employees only." Which way did he go? She looked at him. She looked at the kitchen window. "Loading docks in back. Opens to the alley." Cordova went through the kitchen. The cook, a heavy-set man in a white t-shirt, moved aside without comment. The loading dock door was open. The alley beyond it was empty, except for a dumpster and the heat. Cordova came back through the kitchen and out the front, and Milk was already there, coming around from the back side of the building, shaking his head. They looked at the F-150. They looked at the empty lot. "He's on foot," Milk said. "Not for long." Cordova looked east along US 60. "He's got a vehicle somewhere or he's got a ride coming. Nobody runs on foot out here. They got back in the Expedition and pulled out onto the highway going east. They drove 3 miles before Milk said what they were both thinking, which was that a man who sees a problem coming and leaves his truck behind is a man who has planned for the problem before it arrived, and that planning in this case probably included a second vehicle or a place to go that did not involve highways. They drove 11 more miles. At the 14-mile mark, they saw the F-150 in their rearview mirror. It was coming up behind them at a speed that made the Expedition's 78 miles per hour look stationary. It went past them in the left lane with the particular mechanical confidence of a vehicle that has been built for this and is being used for exactly what it was built for. Jack Almeida was visible through the driver's window for the half-second it took the F-150 to pass. Brick red hair, forward-facing, no apparent concern about the Expedition or anything else. Milk put the Expedition to 90. The F-150 pulled away. At mile marker 222, the F-150 took a dirt 2-track off the south side of the highway, no signal, no brake lights, just a hard right turn onto a road that was not visible from the highway until you were on it. The road ran south into the Superstition foothills through creosote and palo verde, and the kind of terrain that looks flat from the highway and turns out to have grades and washes and rock shelves that require specific knowledge to navigate at speed. Milk took the 2-track. The Expedition had all-season tires and a 3.5L EcoBoost V6, and a clearance height that was adequate for a parking lot and insufficient for this. The 2-track had ruts, rocks, and a surface that had been graded once in 2018 by the BLM and not since. Milk took it to 40, and the Expedition's front end started making a sound that suggested the suspension had an opinion about this that the drivetrain did not share. A mile and a half in, Milk stopped. The F-150 was gone. The 2-track ran another mile visible before it turned and disappeared into a draw. The dust from the F-150 hung in the still air and then settled. Cordova looked at the terrain. "We're not following him in this." "No," Milk said. They sat in the Expedition on a 2-track in the Superstition foothills and looked at the empty road ahead and thought about $20,000 and whether $20,000 was worth following a man in a supercharged F-150 into country he knew, and they didn't, in a vehicle that was already making the kind of sound that produces repair estimates with 4 digits. Milk put the Expedition in reverse. Nick Tolliver found the security camera still at the Mesa storage facility on East Main at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, after 4 hours of working backwards from the Apache Junction unit, through facility registration records, and a conversation with a Gilbert facility manager who had told him, off the record, that the marshal's office had already pulled the same records the day before, which told Tolliver that Paulson was working the same thread and was ahead of him by a day. The still showed a partial profile, 3/4 view, a man in a gray t-shirt standing beside a unit door with a key in the padlock. The hair was visible, brick red, unmistakable, the same hair Tolliver had seen through an F-150 rear window on the Loop 202. The timestamp put it at Tuesday morning, 9:47 a.m. Tolliver saved the image to his phone. He drove east through Apache Junction on the Superstition Freeway and picked up US 60 and ran the corridor the way he had learned to run corridors in 8 months at the DIA. Not fast, not slow, eyes working, looking for the vehicle or the shape of a situation that indicated the vehicle had been there. He stopped at gas stations. He stopped at the Circle K on the highway. He showed the phone image to a clerk who looked at it and said she'd seen a man who looked like that 2 days ago, maybe, she wasn't sure, and a different clerk who said definitely not. He kept going. At Superior, he stopped at the Buckhorn Grill, because his phone GPS showed it as the last commercial structure before the highway opened into longer stretches of nothing, and because he was hungry, and because the parking lot had the kind of gravel surface that held tire impressions, and he had learned to check parking lots. He went inside. The server was the same woman who had told Cordova about the loading dock 4 hours earlier, and she looked at Tolliver with the same neutral assessment and arrived at a different conclusion based on the badge he showed her. "Dia," Tolliver said, "I'm looking for someone." He showed her the phone image. She looked at it. She looked at Tolliver. "He was here this morning. Came in, ordered a burrito to go. Left through the kitchen when 2 men in an expedition showed up across the street." "What men?" "I don't know. They came in after him. Went through the kitchen. He'd already gone out the loading dock." "Did he come back for his truck?" "Dark green F-150? "Yes." "He took it 10 minutes after the expedition left. Drove it out of the alley and went east." Tolliver looked out the diner window at US 60 running east into the Superstition country. The mountains a wall of brown and red on the horizon. The highway cutting through the foothills in a straight line that promised nothing. "How long ago?" Tolliver said. 4 hours, maybe." He bought a coffee. He went back to the Fusion and sat in the driver's seat with the coffee and the phone image and the mental map he was building of where Jack Almeida had been and where that suggested he was going. East. Into country that got rougher the further you went. The highway thinning, the development falling away, the BLM land opening up on both sides in the way that land opens up when the government owns it and has decided not to do anything with it except let it be what it is. He drove east. He drove for 23 miles, watching the side roads, watching for the F-150, watching for anything that suggested recent passage. At mile marker 225, he saw a dirt 2-track on the south side of the highway with fresh tire impressions in the entrance, 2 different tread patterns, one wide and aggressive, one narrower, the narrow one coming back out, and the wide one going in and not coming out. He took the 2-track. The Fusion handled it the way a front-wheel drive sedan with government fleet suspension handles dirt roads, which is to say, it handled it, but filed a complaint in the form of sounds from the undercarriage that Tolliver heard and decided to interpret as non-critical. He drove 3 miles. The 2-track turned south into a draw and climbed a low ridge, and on the far side of the ridge dropped into a shallow basin with a water tank in the center. The BLM had put the tank there in the 80s, a galvanized steel cylinder on a concrete pad with a solar pump and a float valve, part of a wildlife water program that kept springs and seeps available during dry years. The tank sat under a Palo Verde tree that had been there longer than the tank, and that threw afternoon shade across the east side of the pad. The F-150 was parked in the shade. Jack Almeida sat on the tailgate, eating a burrito from a paper bag. Tolliver pulled the Fusion up alongside the F-150 and stopped and turned off the engine and sat for a moment looking at the man on the tailgate, who looked back at him with the level, unsurprised expression of someone who had heard the car coming from a mile away and had decided not to move. Tolliver got out. Jack stayed on the tailgate. "I've been following you for 3 days," Tolliver said. Jack took another bite of the burrito. "I know," he said. "Mesa Storage Facility. The security camera. You knew it was there." "I knew. You let me see you." Jack looked at the burrito, like he was considering whether it was worth finishing. He appeared to decide it was. He ate the rest of it, and folded the paper bag and set it beside him on the tailgate. "You going to take me in?" he said. Tolliver stood beside the Fusion with his hand near his hip, not on the Glock, not away from it. He thought about the envelope in the Tucson field office with his signature on it, and Carver telling him to drive the speed limit, and the pursuit on the Loop 202 that he should have called in and didn't. He thought about Paulson's office and the 6 lines on the legal pad and the aerial photograph on the wall. He thought about the man on the tailgate who had let him see the red hair on the highway and let him see the profile at the storage facility, and was sitting here now eating a burrito in the shade of Apollo Verde like this was a reasonable place to be on a Thursday afternoon. "Not today," Tolliver said. Jack looked at him. He looked at him the way you look at something you're trying to measure against something else, working out what the difference means. "Why not? You didn't shoot me at the rest stop. You had the angle, and you didn't take it." "Don't read into it," Jack said. "I'm not reading into it. I'm saying I remember it." Jack looked at the water tank. He looked at the desert south of the basin, which ran to the edge of the visible world in layers of brown and gray, and the particular washed-out blue that the Superstitions turned when the light was direct. He looked tired. Not the tiredness of one hard day, but the accumulated kind, the kind that sits behind the eyes and changes the way a face holds itself. "There's 2 men from Scottsdale looking for you," Tolliver said. "Expedition. They were at the diner. They're probably still out here somewhere." "Garnett's people," Jack said. "The insurance guy. Compliance officer. He needs the cash to stay gone so his fraud stays covered." Jack looked at Tolliver. "Which means he needs me to not be in a position to tell anyone where it is." Tolliver thought about this. "He wants you dead. He wants the cash. I'm the obstacle. Where is it?" Jack said nothing. Tolliver looked at the F-150. He looked at the tonneau cover, closed and locked. He looked at the cargo anchors on the bed rail that showed the faint bright marks of use. "You moved it from the storage units." "Yes." "Where?" "Somewhere Garnett won't find it, and you won't find it, and Paulson won't find it until I'm ready for him to find it." Jack slid off the tailgate. He stood beside the truck and looked at Tolliver across 10 feet of desert and afternoon shade. "You going to follow me when I leave here?" Tolliver thought about Carver and the Tucson field office and the envelope and the incident report he'd written and the parts of the incident report he'd left out. He thought about Paulson's 7th line on the legal pad. "He already knows." "No," Tolliver said. "Why not?" "Because I want to be the one who brings you in," Tolliver said. "Not Garnett's people. Not some Scottsdale contractors who are working outside the law. Me. When it happens right." Jack looked at him for a moment. He appeared to be working something out. "How old are you?" 24. "How long have you been doing this?" 8 months. Jack nodded like this confirmed something he'd suspected. He got in the F-150 and started the engine and backed out of the shade and turned the truck to face the 2-track north. He stopped and looked at Tolliver through the open driver's window. "Paulson's better at this than you are," Jack said. "You should learn from him while you can." He put the truck in gear and drove north up the 2-track toward the highway. The rebuilt V8 moving the F-150 over the rough ground with the easy mechanical confidence of a vehicle that had been built for exactly this, and Tolliver stood beside the Fusion and watched the dust settle and thought about what had just happened and whether he had made the right decision and whether the right decision had anything to do with his career 6 months from now. He got back in the Fusion. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the water tank and the Palo Verde and the basin and the empty road Jack had taken north, and thought about Paulson and the legal pad and the aerial photograph and the specific quality of men who are good at this work, which is that they know when to move and when to wait and when to let something go because forcing it produces worse outcomes than patience. He started the Fusion. He drove back to the highway. Dobie Prout had taken the wrong bus. This was not the first time this had happened to Dobie Prout, and it would not be the last. But it was the first time it had happened on a Suntran route that terminated in Superior, Arizona, which was not where Prout had intended to be, and was where he found himself at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday with a duffel bag, and the growing understanding that his sense of direction had failed him in a way that was going to require a phone call he did not want to make. He got off the bus at a gas station on the east end of Superior and stood in the lot with the duffel and his phone and looked at the map application and concluded that Gold Canyon, where his friend Lonnie lived and where Prout had been trying to get for 2 days, was 41 miles north, and that the Suntran system did not appear to have a route that went there. He was working through whether an Uber from Superior to Gold Canyon was financially defensible when he became aware of the white Expedition parked beside the air pump station on the north side of the lot. 2 men sat in the front seats. They had the posture of people who had been sitting for a while and had not yet decided what to do next. They looked at Prout. Prout looked back with the open friendliness of a man who treats strangers as data sources rather than threats, which had served him well in some situations and poorly in others, and which he had not yet learned to differentiate between in advance. He walked over. "You know how to get to Gold Canyon from here?" he said. The passenger, Cordova, looked at him. "North on 60. Take the first highway that goes northeast. 20 miles, maybe." "Appreciate it." Prout set the duffel down and leaned against the Expedition's hood with the familiarity of a man who does not recognize the concept of personal space as it applies to vehicles. "You guys been out here a while?" "A while," Milk said. "Waiting on someone?" "Something like that." "I've been waiting on things all week," Prout said. "Mostly the wrong things. Turns out I've got a gift for showing up at places right before they stop being the place I need to be at." He looked at the mountains east of Superior. "You play dice?" Cordova looked at him. "What?" "Liar's dice. I've got a set in my jacket." Prout pulled a leather cup from his pocket and showed them 5 dice inside it. "Learned it in Coolidge 6 years ago from a man who said he learned it in prison. I don't know if that's true, but the game's good." Milk looked at Cordova. Cordova looked at the dice. 20 minutes later, Prout was sitting on the hood of the Expedition with $40 in his pocket and the dice cup in his hand, and the specific satisfaction of a man who has turned a wrong bus into a correct outcome. Cordova and Milk had bought into 3 rounds and had lost all 3, not because the game was rigged, but because Prout was good at reading faces and better at reading people who thought they were good at lying. And both Cordova and Milk had believed they could bluff their way through the 3rd round and had been wrong. "You do this a lot," Cordova said. "When I can," Prout said. "It's not a living, but it helps." A dark green F-150 went past on US 60, heading west toward Apache Junction at a speed that suggested purpose. Prout watched it go. He looked at the truck, and he looked at the 2 men in the Expedition who watched it too, and who watched it with the specific intensity of people who had been waiting for that exact truck and had just watched it leave. "Friend of yours?" Prout said. "Not exactly," Milk said. Prout looked at the highway. He looked at the $40 in his hand. He thought about the F-150 and the 2 men, and the way they'd looked at the truck and the way the truck had moved past them without slowing. And he thought about all the things he'd seen this week that he had not fully understood and that had not required him to understand them. He pocketed the money. He picked up the duffel. "Well," Prout said, "I appreciate the directions." He walked back to the gas station and went inside and asked the clerk if there was anyone around who drove to Gold Canyon regularly and would take a passenger for $30. The clerk made a phone call. 20 minutes later, a man in a pickup arrived, and Prout got in and they drove north on US 60, and Prout looked out the window at the desert and the mountains, and thought about dice and wrong buses, and the specific mercy of a week that lets you win $40 from strangers who are having a worse day than you are. Chapter 6. Paulson came up the 2-track on a Friday afternoon when the temperature was 94 degrees, and the October sun was working on what remained of the day, with the particular directness of light that arrives at 3 in the afternoon in the desert and has nowhere else to be. He drove the gray Tahoe at 25 miles an hour over the ruts and rocks and the ungraded surface that the BLM had last attended to in 2018, and he did it with the same economy he brought to everything, not slowly, but at the speed the road allowed, which was a speed that got him where he was going without requiring explanations later about why the vehicle needed work. He came over the ridge and dropped into the basin and saw the F-150 parked under the Palo Verde beside the water tank. He pulled the Tahoe up at 30 feet and stopped. Jack Almeida sat on the tailgate. He had a bottle of water in his hand, and his boots on the bumper, and the posture of a man who had heard the vehicle coming from a mile away, and had decided that moving was not on the agenda. He looked at Paulson through the windshield, with the level, unsurprised expression of someone who had been working through a list of outcomes and had just confirmed which one was arriving. Paulson turned off the engine. He got out. He closed the door and leaned against it with his arms crossed and looked at Jack on the tailgate and said, "Come in with me, Jack." He said it the way he said everything, without weight on any particular word, without inflection, without the theater of a man who wants you to understand that he's serious. The seriousness was in the fact that he'd driven here and found the man and said the thing. Everything else was surplus. Jack drank from the water bottle. He set it on the tailgate beside him. He looked at Paulson leaning against the Tahoe 30 feet away in the October afternoon with the desert opening up behind him in all directions and the Superstitions sitting on the horizon like something that had been there before either of them and would continue after both. He looked at the water tank. He looked at the Palo Verde. He looked at the shade the tree was throwing across the concrete pad, and at the basin beyond the tank, and at the 2-track running north over the ridge the way Paulson had come, and the way, presumably, Paulson intended to take him back. He thought about the Phoenix-Tucson corridor, and the 4 jobs he'd worked on it in 3 years, and the $900,000 in banded 20s currently distributed in 3 locations in the Superstition foothills that Paulson did not know about, and that Jack had planned to consolidate next week into a single location that was further east and harder to reach, and that required a vehicle better than the F-150, which he'd been planning to trade for something with more clearance and a lower profile. He thought about the corridor, and how it had been getting smaller for a year, not in geography but in the space between what he could do and what other people were watching him do, which was a space that had been shrinking every job, and that he'd known, in the way you know things you don't say out loud, would eventually close entirely. He thought about Tolliver at this same water tank yesterday, and about what Tolliver had said, "I want to be the one who brings you in," and about Paulson leaning against the Tahoe now with the same calm he'd probably brought to all of this, the same systematic reduction of variables, the same patience that had put him here at this tank at this hour with this particular question. He considered the question for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when someone is waiting to see what you'll do. Paulson waited. Jack's hand moved. Paulson cleared his holster first. He cleared it with the unhurried efficiency of a man who has done this before, under circumstances where efficiency mattered. And the Glock came up, and the sight picture came together, and the first shot broke the silence in the basin into 2 pieces that went in different directions and didn't come back the same. Jack's shot went into the Palo Verde. He was already falling when he fired it, his right side going down, the Glock in his hand discharging when his shoulder hit the tailgate, and the barrel was pointed at the tree, and the bullet took bark off the trunk at chest height and kept going into the desert behind it. He went down off the tailgate onto the ground beside the F-150. The water bottle stayed on the tailgate, half full. Paulson came forward. He kept the Glock on Jack and came around the front of the F-150 and crouched and looked at him, and Jack looked back with the focused clarity that a person sometimes has in the first 30 seconds after something has changed, the way a thing changes when it cannot be changed back. Not peaceful, not panicked, just present, the way a fire is present. "The cash," Paulson said. Jack looked at the Superstitions. Jack looked at Paulson. His face had the expression of the DMV photo that Paulson had shown Tolliver in his office 6 days ago, forward-facing, neutral, cooperating with a bureaucratic requirement and nothing more. He did not say where the cash was. He did not say anything. Paulson sat on his heels beside the F-150 and waited. He waited, not because he expected an answer, but because waiting was what you did. Because a man deserved the space to say something if he had something to say. And if he didn't, then the space was what you gave him anyway, because it was the only thing you could. The afternoon sat on them both. The Palo Verde moved in something too small to call wind. Jack looked at the sky above the Superstitions, and his face did the thing that faces do when they stop doing the other things. Paulson stood. He holstered the Glock. He looked at the F-150 for a moment, and at the tonneau cover, and at the cargo anchors on the bedrail that showed the bright marks of recent use. He looked at the water tank, and at the basin, and at the 2-track running north over the ridge. He went back to the Tahoe. He got his phone. He called the Mesa field office. He gave them the location, and told them what they'd need, and ended the call, and stood beside the Tahoe in the October heat, and looked at the Palo Verde and the F-150 in its shade, and the desert closing back in around the place where something had been that was not there now. He stayed until the field office arrived, which took 47 minutes. He stood beside the Tahoe, and did not go back to the F-150, and did not look at the thing beside it. He stood and watched the basin, and the ridge, and the light changing on the Superstitions as the afternoon worked its way toward evening. And he thought about the corridor and the 4 jobs and the pattern he'd been tracking for 3 years, and the specific quality of work that ends not with a solution but with an absence. The field office came over the ridge in 2 vehicles. Paulson met them at the water tank and told them what they needed to know and did not tell them anything else. He gave them the location and the vehicle description and the sequence of events in the order they had happened, and they took it all down with the professional attention of people who do this work and who understand that some questions have answers and some do not. He drove back to Phoenix in the long light of an October evening that turned the whole valley amber, and then purple, and then dark, and he thought about Jack Almeida the entire drive, and arrived at no conclusions that he had not already arrived at before. Walter Garnett's billing discrepancies surfaced 6 weeks later when a junior analyst at Pacific Bonding Group named Sarah Chen was running a routine audit on high-value claims from the previous quarter and noticed that the declared value on the Meridian ML4419C shipment did not match the carrier's internal documentation, which she had requested as part of her standard verification protocol, and which had arrived without anyone thinking to intercept it. She flagged the discrepancy. Her supervisor reviewed it. The review went up the chain. Within a week, Pacific Bonding Group had opened an internal investigation that led, through a sequence of interviews and document requests that Garnett could not deflect, to the Cayman account and the 18 months of double billing, and the elegant structure that Garnett had been genuinely proud of, and that collapsed in the way elegant structures collapse when one support fails and the rest follow. Garnett negotiated a plea. He received 4 years in a minimum security facility in Safford, Arizona, which was 60 miles from the Superstition wilderness, though this proximity meant nothing to anyone involved. Frank Olds filed a report with Pacific Bonding Group detailing his investigation and the limits of what had been recovered. The report was filed and not circulated, for reasons that the firm's legal department understood, and that Olds did not dispute. The $900,000 in Cartel cash was never recovered. Not by Paulson, not by Olds, not by the DIA, not by any of the agencies that spent varying amounts of time and resources looking for it. The cash remained wherever Jack Almeida had put it, in 3 locations in the Superstition foothills that existed on no map and that were marked by landmarks that made sense only to someone who had spent years in that country and knew how to read it. The Superstitions held the secret the way the Superstitions held everything, completely without commentary, and with the patience of terrain that has been there long enough to understand that human urgency has a short half-life. Nick Tolliver received his full DIA commission in March of the following year. He spent a decade working the Phoenix field office on cases that involved the corridor and the organizations that used it, and he became the kind of agent who did not make the news and did not pursue media attention, and was known, among the people who worked with him, as someone you could trust to do the work without performing it. He thought about the water tank east of Superior occasionally, the way people think about decisions they made that could have gone differently. He thought about Jack Almeida on the tailgate eating a burrito and saying, "Paulson's better at this than you are," and he thought about whether that was true and whether the things he'd learned in the 10 years since had closed the gap or just made him better at recognizing how wide it was. He decided it was probably both. Tag Dunning drove north out of Apache Junction in the fall of 2024 and did not return. He worked construction in Flagstaff for a year, then moved further north to Page, and then further north again, and his name appeared in no records after 2026 that connected him to the corridor or to the events of that October or to anyone involved in them. There is a man named T. Dunn in the payroll records of a logging operation in northern Utah in 2028, but it may not be the same man, and there is no one left to ask. Peso Archuleta wrote a 47-tweet thread about his involvement in the Loomis job 6 months after the fact, posting it from a bar in Tucson where he was working as a line cook, and where he had been telling the story to anyone who would listen, with the gradual embellishments that stories accumulate when they're told often enough. The thread got 11 likes. 4 of them were Peso's own, from alternate accounts he'd created to make the thread look more popular than it was. No media outlet picked it up. No law enforcement agency investigated it. The thread existed on the internet the way most threads exist, briefly visible, quickly buried, read by no one who mattered, and remembered by no one at all. Peso deleted it after 3 weeks and got a different job in a different city and stopped telling the story. Dobie Pruitt sat in a window seat 3 rows from the front of a southbound Greyhound on a Tuesday morning in November, heading from Phoenix to Tucson for reasons that had to do with a woman he'd met at a Circle K, and a conversation that had gone better than most conversations, and that had ended with an exchange of phone numbers and a vague plan to meet in Tucson, which Pruitt had decided to interpret as a concrete invitation. He had a duffel bag. He had a 32-ounce Polar Pop. He had $47 in his wallet, and the conviction that the morning was, if not promising, at least not actively hostile. The bus stopped at Casa Grande. 3 people got off. 4 people got on. One of them was a large woman in a floral maxi dress. She came down the aisle with a canvas tote in her hand, and the deliberate posture of someone moving through a space that has not been designed for her proportions. The dress was bright, floral in a way that suggested a different season or a different decade, and sat on her frame with the approximate fit of a garment that had been selected for availability rather than suitability. She wore a denim jacket over the dress, open, because the alternative appeared to involve structural stress. The wig was auburn. It sat at an angle on her head that suggested a strong opinion about something, though what that something was remained unclear. She took the aisle seat directly across from Prout, and set the canvas tote on the floor between her feet, and settled in with the care of someone who has learned to occupy a seat in a way that minimizes objections. Prout looked at her. He looked at the dress. He looked at the denim jacket. He looked at the wig, which sat at its angle with the confidence of something that had made a decision and intended to stand by it. He looked at the hands in her lap, large hands, the hands of someone who had done work that left marks, and at the way those hands rested with the specific stillness of hands that knew how to be still. He looked at the jaw. The jaw was square through the chin and wide through the cheekbones, and did not match the wig above it in the way that a piece of furniture does not match a room when it has been brought in from somewhere else. Prout looked at all of this. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the woman in the Loomis van at the Flying J 2 months ago, and at the F-150 in the Circle K lot in Apache Junction, and at the truck going past on US 60 outside Superior while two men in an expedition watched it leave. He thought about the BLM water tank east of Superior, and the gray Tahoe, and the man leaning against it who had not needed to lean very long. He thought about Paulson, whose name he'd learned from a news article 2 weeks later that had described the incident in the factual language that news articles use when describing things that have concluded and that do not require additional comment. He thought about the 9 words he'd carried for 2 months. I knew something was off about that woman. He opened his mouth. The woman looked at him. She looked at him with the level, assessing quality of someone who is waiting to see what you're going to say and has already decided how to respond to most versions of it. Green eyes. A face that had been in the Arizona sun long enough for the sun to have made permanent decisions about it. Prout closed his mouth. He looked out the window. The Greyhound pulled out of the Casa Grande rest stop and merged onto I-10 South, and the desert ran past on both sides in the flat November light, the saguaros standing back from the highway with their arms up, the mountains sitting blue and permanent on every horizon. The bus moved through all of it at 67 miles an hour, carrying whoever it was carrying toward whatever came next, and Prout watched the landscape go past and thought about the things he'd seen that he had not fully understood and that had not required him to understand them. He drank from the Polar Pop. He looked at the woman in the aisle seat across from him, who had taken out a phone and was looking at it with the focused attention of someone reading something that required concentration. He thought about the water tank and the gray Tahoe and the specific mercy of knowing when to say something and when to let a thing go, because saying it produces outcomes worse than the silence. He decided the silence was better. He looked out the window and watched the desert and the mountains and the highway running south through the corridor between Phoenix and Tucson that had been there before any of this and would continue after all of it, carrying people and cargo and secrets in the specific proportions that highways carry them, which is to say, mostly the first 2 and occasionally the third, and sometimes all 3 at once without anyone knowing which was which. The bus rolled south. Prout finished his Polar Pop. The woman in the floral maxi dress put her phone away and looked out her window at the same landscape Prout was looking at, and neither of them said anything, and the desert ran past, and the mountains stood where they'd always stood, and the Greyhound carried them both toward Tucson in the clear November morning. The end.